We are going live in 3, 2, 1.
Good evening, everyone. On this positive note, with a very positive prayer, I am delighted to welcome you all to the first episode of our very unique and interesting new series, Bara on Bara, under the aegis of Dr. Jaideep Tank and Dr. Parikshit Tank. This is a series of 12 webinars which will be held on the 12th of every month for 12 months from 7 to 9 p.m. This series will focus on outpatient and inpatient procedures of obstetrics and gynecology, which we are sure each and every one of you will benefit from tremendously. So don't forget to set a reminder in your calendar for the 12th of every month for the next 1 year. Without taking any more time, I would like to invite Dr. Jaideep Tang sir to say a few words to all the people attending this webinar and also to deliver his talk on iron deficiency in pregnancy, clinical pragmatism at its best. Of course, Dr. Jaideep Tank needs no introduction. However, I'll say a few lines for him that he's the immediate past Secretary General of FOXI. He's the president of past president of MOGS. He is a chair of International Federation of Obstetric and Gynecology Committee of Safe Abortions and a deputy secretary Asia Oceania Federation of Obstetrics and Gynecology. So we welcome you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ritu, for that extremely kind and generous introduction. It is indeed my pleasure to present this series to you. This is the Bara on Bara series, or the 12 on the 12th series. And obviously, this series has been named this way because we intend to do 12 webinars on this during this series on the 12th of every month. So please allow me for a minute while I share my screen. Right. So I hope my slide is seen and I am audible.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So as you will notice, we have jumped right into the academics without too much of preamble. And I will take this opportunity to thank my co-convener, Dr. Parikshit Tang, the moderator, Ritu, and of course, Namita, who has very kindly agreed to participate in this series through her brilliant talk show called Uncondition Yourself, which are essentially inspiring conversations with women leaders. And we are quite lucky to have an exceptional woman leader in the form of Revati Roy today, and I'm quite looking forward to that talk. We will then have a panel discussion, again on a topic, it's something we do every day. And yet I find that we don't really talk about it enough. It's almost as if we are doing all these things on what as residents we used to call spinal level. And therefore, I think it is quite important to put our thoughts on these kind of topics. And this panel is going to be moderated by my very dear friend Bhaskar Pal. And the panelists are absolutely brilliant. I'm sure it will be quite a great panel. There is Anaita, Charmila, Vaishali, Surekha, Anshu, and Gunjal who are participating in the panel. And I would like to thank all of them for very readily agreeing to participate in this panel. The talk today is on iron deficiency in anemia, and we have called it clinical pragmatism at its best. And as I go through the talk, perhaps I will be able to bring home the point of why I use the word clinical pragmatism when it comes to iron deficiency in anemia. But let me start with this very powerful quotation by Laura Harm. And she says we have a secret in our culture. And it's not that birth is painful, it's that women are strong. And I think this is such a relevant, such an important, and such an apt quotation for the women who, in their millions, give birth all across the world, fulfilling a biological function that did not necessarily ask for. This is also evident in the fact that anemia, in fact, has a massive prevalence all over the world. In fact, if you look at the countries which are in dark red, you will see that the prevalence of anemia exceeds more than half of all women who are pregnant. And therefore, if someone were to ask me, Jaideep, do a case presentation on anemia, I would be hard pressed to find one case. And that is why, when I said clinical pragmatism, I'm going to frame it in reference of a case presentation. And the case that I'm presenting today is the case of the pregnant woman, because over 90% of all pregnant women in our country have anemia. It cuts across age, it cuts across socioeconomic barriers, and it cuts across the location that the person lives in. Truly speaking, when you want to present a case of anemia, you cannot help but say that the story of anemia is the story of almost every pregnant woman in our country. But to illustrate a case and to make the discussion clinically pragmatic, let me outline a case over here. The name is obviously fictional. She is 22 years of age, it's her first pregnancy. She's come at 16 weeks pregnant for her first visit, normal vitals and ultrasound, but her hemoglobin is 8 grams per dl. Obviously, she is what one would like to call mild anemia on the cusp of going into moderate kind of an anemia. So, the discussion in this presentation will center around how to deal with these patients when they step into your OPD and are sitting across the table from you with a hemoglobin report ranging anywhere from 2 to 12 gram percent. So, of course, as a bit of a background, we know that the common types of anemias are essentially the nutritional ones and the hemoglobinopathies. There are, of course, the rare kinds of anemias, but like students in a Viva, where we tend to remember the rare thing first before we talk about the common, let's for today's presentation focus on the common types of anemia. And within these common types of anemia, it would not be an exaggeration to say that it is the iron deficiency anemias which actually rule the roost in terms of the number of cases. Patients could have hemorrhagic anemias, but those hemorrhagic anemias generally tend to present themselves in the form of either symptoms or signs. The first thing to realize is that, of course, pregnancy by itself predisposes to anemia, simply because the plasma volume increases by 40 to 50%, whereas the RBC mass increases by 20 to 30%. So, although there is a total increase in blood volume, essentially because of the discrepancy between the rise of plasma and RBC, there is a hemodilution. And because there is a hemodilution, pregnancy itself has a physiological anemia which has to be compensated first. If you look at the pathophysiology of iron deficiency, you will see that the iron stores are actually reduced without reducing serum iron levels. And when that is the case, they can be assessed with serum ferritin measurements. Once the iron stores are depleted, there still is adequate iron from daily RBC turnover. But once iron deficiency actually occurs, that means the body runs out of these fallbacks for iron, your hemoglobin starts falling just below the lower normal limit. And then once the hemoglobin falls to less than the normal levels, you have iron deficiency anemia. This means that the body has a lot of backup when it comes to iron before it finally culminates in iron deficiency anemia. The point I'm trying to make here is that although iron deficiency anemia is actually the most common nutritional anemia, anemia is actually a late indicator of iron deficiency. So the estimated prevalence of iron deficiency vis-a-vis what is actually presenting as anemia may actually be 2.5 times more. And remember that pregnancy is a state of negative iron balance. So if you take all these factors together, the depletion of resources, physiological anemia, which ultimately causes a negative iron balance, I think it very nicely explains why women who even have normal hemoglobin in pregnancy should be supplemented with iron throughout their pregnancy. There has always been a lot of debate because it's been a little difficult to prove the causality between iron deficiency and maternal mortality and morbidity. However, there is now excellent data to show that the odds of maternal death were twice as high in those with severe anemia compared to those without severe anemia. And this is a very strong, temporal, and consistent association reproducible in all kinds of statistical analysis. Sensitivity analyses emphasize that severe anemia in pregnant and postnatal women strongly and independently contribute to adverse outcomes irrespective of the cause. And there really is the importance of both diagnosing anemia early in pregnancy and managing it adequately, because it's not only about the mortality. Anemia is also associated with poor maternal outcomes, including increased morbidity relating to postpartum hemorrhage, antenatal sepsis, and postnatal sepsis. So you have this patient, Sushila, she's sitting in front of you and she's saying that she feels easy fatigability, weakness, irritability, low mood, etc. The problem with the history and symptoms of anemia and iron deficiency, particularly in pregnancy, are the fact that a lot of these symptoms could also be normal in pregnancy. Therefore, I would always think that I wouldn't really rely upon only the history and the symptoms to either rule out or say whether that patient has got anemia or not. It would really have to be totally dependent on not only my clinical findings, but also the laboratory investigations which the patient should subsequently undergo. Of course, you need to look at the history of bleeding PV, the passage of worms in stool. I think that's a very important history which we sometimes miss, and also something which can be addressed very easily with antihelminthics. And then, of course, you have all the various histories that you need to ask for, including a family history of hemoglobinopathy or repeated blood transfusion. Rule of thumb, by the time you start seeing and the signs of anemia become obvious, like glossitis, scoliosis, fetal edema, etc., the patient is usually already into either moderate or severe anemia. So if you are seeing signs of anemia in this order that I have written over here, you should probably, in a bit of a hurry, investigate that patient and make sure that you have diagnosed the degree of anemia correctly. So again, you have this pregnant patient sitting in front of you, and in the beginning, I strongly believe that all pregnant women should be screened for anemia during pregnancy, irrespective of their gestational age at first contact and socioeconomic status. And a CBC with a hemoglobin estimation is the least that you can do. It is a good idea to do at least 4 hemoglobin estimations at various times in pregnancy. And this is because of that graph of physiological anemia that I showed you a little earlier. Because even if she has a normal hemoglobin now, even if she's taking iron supplement now, because of the way the RBC mass and the plasma mass changes in pregnancy and the discrepancy between the change, it is quite likely that she may develop anemia even with having iron supplementation. We know that anemias are typically characterized as mild, moderate, and severe. And the importance of this classification is to decide the treatment approach. Sushila, who has come to me and is sitting in front of me just now, has a hemoglobin of 8, which would put her somewhere in the mild to moderate category. However, if she were having a hemoglobin of, say, for example, lower than 5 or 6, she would be categorized as severe, and then the whole approach to the diagnosis and treatment would dramatically change. Now, this table is actually taken from a WHO publication, and the reason that I have put this table in the presentation is not because I don't think everybody does not know what mild, moderate, and severe anemia is. I have put it because of that sentence that I have highlighted in yellow. And the sentence reads, mild is a misnomer. Iron deficiency is already advanced at the time anemia is defect, and the deficiency has consequences, even when no anemia is clinically apparent. So just to reiterate the fact that please don't take iron supplementation in a patient who has an apparently normal or a borderline hemoglobin lightly. You still need to counsel the patient fully, and she still needs that iron supplementation throughout her pregnancy. Once, of course, now I have seen Sushila, she's got a hemoglobin of 8. What is my next step? My next step is to look at the RBC indices and at the peripheral smear. The peripheral smear might show me that she has a microcytic hypochromic type of an anemia, which would indicate that she does indeed have an iron deficiency anemia. If it shows me a normocytic normochromic or a macrocytic hypochromic type of a picture, then obviously I will think of other etiologies. And all this also gets reflected in the red cell indices, and you can see very clearly here that iron deficiency anemia has usually a hemoglobin of less than 11, an MCV of less than 75, an MCH of less than 27, and an MCHC of less than 32, along with a microcytic hypochromic type of a peripheral smear. One of the most common diagnostic dilemmas, particularly in patients who take oral iron and then the iron still does not seem to rise, particularly in some particular ethnicities, is a diagnosis between iron deficiency anemia versus the thalassemia trait. And you will see here that although you have the MCHC, RBC, and the Mensa index to try and differentiate between the two, these are the patients where you should not hesitate to get a hemoglobin electrophoresis done to rule out a thalassemia minor trait. If you want to do iron studies, and I must confess that it is not always very important to do these if you have read the indices and the smear properly. However, there could be certain circumstances where you need to do these iron tests. So just for some clarity, a low serum ferritin level reflects depleted iron stores and hence is a precondition for iron deficiency in the absence of infection. Serum iron, transferrin, and transferrin saturation. Iron deficiency results in a reduction of serum levels, an elevation in transferrin, and a net reduction in transferrin saturation. These are the tests that are done more commonly. Serum transferrin receptors and erythrocyte porphyrin are not always done very commonly. However, it is always good to know what to do and how to interpret them. Besides these, should you do other tests? As I said, it depends on what you find at the peripheral smear. It's always a good idea to do a urine routine. Stool examination for occult blood is actually an underestimated investigation, particularly for patients who have not been dewormed. Whenever we find a patient with anemia, whether it's obstetric or non-obstetric, we always deworm the patient at the first instance. I think sometimes that is actually the cause of the anemia, and as I said, the treatment is extraordinarily simple. Although the gold standard for the diagnosis of IDA is the absence of stainable iron on a bone marrow biopsy, remember that it's hardly ever done. I mean, as far as iron deficiency anemia is concerned, in the last 25 years, I really don't remember a single instance when we have actually sent the patient for a bone marrow biopsy. However, in case you are considering a bone marrow biopsy, you should do it when there is a failure of therapy, or there is a hypoplastic or aplastic anemia, or you're suspecting Kala Azar. Of course, whenever you see anemia, You also need to look for infectious diseases like malaria, the helminths, tuberculosis, HIV, other nutritional deficiencies. For example, it's always a good idea to supplement with a little bit of folate along with your iron supplementation, and never forget the impact of hemoglobinopathies, something that we have already talked about. So once you have an idea, and as I said, now you have Sushila sitting in front of you with 8 grams, but suppose she would give me a report of less than 6 grams. As I said, the approach to her management, investigations, and treatment would dramatically change. It would dramatically change also depending on which trimester of the pregnancy she would present in. So, for example, for 8 to 10, or what is classically called mild anemia, oral iron in any trimester of the pregnancy should suffice. However, for the moderate form, you could consider parenteral iron, particularly in the third trimester, and particularly if there has not been a response or the patient is non-compliant with oral iron. And if she has a hemoglobin of less than 6, then all the options, including oral, parenteral iron, and blood, that is PAXs, should be on the table, depending on how the patient is clinically. If she is breathless, if she's dyspneic, if she's hemodynamically not very stable, then of course she needs urgent admission and a transfusion of whole blood. However, it is iron deficiency anemia, and therefore it stands to reason that iron therapy is the treatment of choice for these patients. Oral is always the first choice, although all oral iron preparations actually give a similar response in hemoglobin rise. What makes a difference is tolerability and cost. The newer preparations of iron are actually tolerated much better. And because they are tolerated much better, the patient is that much more compliant. And because that patient is that much more compliant, the rise in hemoglobin is proportionately more for that patient. And of course, you need to look at the cost. Remember that parenteral iron should ideally only be used if either there is intolerance to oral iron or there is a poor compliance. And this is because the response to parenteral iron is not greater or faster than the response to oral iron. How much and how long? You need to give around 60 milligram per day of elemental iron for supplementation, and for treatment 120 to 180. Iron therapy should be continued till iron stores are replenished, and this means it usually has to be continued till 3 months after hemoglobin becomes normal. The important message I would like to give here is that even lactation drains iron resources. So it's all well and good to give iron during the pregnancy. However, delivery is not the end point of iron administration. We normally tell patients that you should continue iron as well as calcium at different times of the day till as long as you're breastfeeding. So delivery, as I said, is not the end point for iron supplementation. If she is anemic to begin with, she will probably lose more blood during her delivery, and she will need iron supplementation also during the lactation. When you're using iron, remember that calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus for some salts can reduce the absorption of iron. I always prefer to give calcium separate from the time when I give iron. Antacids and H2 blockers can reduce the absorption, and iron reduces the absorption of oral thyroxine. So these drugs should be given with a minimum of a 2-hour interval of iron. If there is no improvement with oral iron, and remember, if you are seeing a patient with a hemoglobin less than 10, it's always a good idea to do a hemoglobin 15 or 20 days down the line to see whether she's responding well and whether the hemoglobin is rising or not. If there is no improvement, then you need to look at either non-compliance, which is frankly speaking the most common reason given all the wonderful iron salts that we have now, or malabsorption or hemoglobinopathies. It's quite easy to look for hemoglobinopathies. You can just do a HP electrophoresis and it will tell you whether there is a hemoglobinopathy or not. However, if you're looking at malabsorption or non-compliance, then you need to use parenteral iron. And this is, of course, the classic formula by which we calculate the iron deficiency in iron deficit in milligram, and then we dose the patient appropriately. We pretty much don't use intramuscular injections for iron. We either use iron sucrose or FCM, and we typically give it as an IV infusion. We prefer to give it as an IV infusion rather than a bolus. FCM is given in the way which has been described below. It's always given very slowly over a certain period of time, and it's never ever given as a bolus, because if you give it as a bolus and if there is a side effect, then you will be in trouble. However, I would like to reiterate over here that the new formulations of parenteral iron are extraordinarily safe and effective. The problem is that we are still stuck with that thinking about the way we used to give iron earlier. And I remember it used to be quite an exercise to give iron before these new salts came in. The new salts, however, are exceedingly safe, and they can be used extremely safely and very, very effectively. So don't hesitate to use parenteral iron in case the patient is not responding to the oral iron. Blood transfusion, of course, should be a measure of last resort. If the hemoglobin is less than 6 grams, if there are features of decompensation, or if you are planning a surgical delivery with a hemoglobin of less than 8, those are all the places where you need to use blood transfusion. Don't use it for chronic anemia, and don't use old blood, cold blood, or sold blood. This used to be one of the theories, and you should always prefer packed red cells over whole blood so that you don't overload the patient with the plasma component of the blood. So at the end, I would like to say that anemia is not simply a medical problem. Yes, there are medical issues with anemia, and that is really why anemia is so important. Anemia is associated with social issues like patriarchal attitudes, malnutrition, the whole trope about women being the last to eat or women having only leftovers to eat. And for me, anemia actually raises a much, much broader question of whether health is actually a right for our women. Because if health is really a right for our women, ideally none of them should be anemic, because it is not right in a way, and excuse the pun, for any pregnant woman to have anemia, and more importantly, to end their pregnancy with anemia. In fact, I feel that one of the indices of the effectiveness of antenatal care could easily be the number of pregnant women who deliver in the presence of a hemoglobin less than 10, because it speaks to how well the women have been looked after during their pregnancy. So, of course, you have seen that chart over there where the WHO says that they're going to reduce the incidence of anemia very dramatically, and that is part of the SDG goals. However, it is, according to me, quite an ambitious project. And as JFK said, all this will not be finished in the first 100 days, nor will it be finished in the first 1000 days, nor even perhaps in our lifetime on this planet. But let us begin. Let me end by appealing to all of you to please vote and support for me as I stand for the president of FOXY in this election year of 2021-22. I've developed a website. It's called isupportjaydiptang.com. If you have not visited it, please visit it. There is a video blog where all the CMEs of all the series that I'm convening will be uploaded. And there you can see that there is a link to a Telegram channel where you can go and get the latest updates, and please join it. I'm very thrilled and excited to share that more than 1,700 people have already registered their support for me as president of FOXY on this website, and I'm very, very thankful, deeply appreciative and grateful to all of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Once again, I was blown away by your talk, and everyone else also, I'm sure. Thank you for such a beautiful talk. I would request Sagar now to play the video.
Bara, 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 ho bara. Bara, 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 ho bara. Bara, बहती धारा, सबका मैं बनूं सहारा, क्योंकि मैं हूँ more than बारा। बारा 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 हो बारा, बारा 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 हो बारा। बारा के नीचे मेरा दिल घबरावे, बाल झड़ जावे तेरा पीला पड़ जावे, बारा से ऊपर तो बात बन जावे, शक्ति आ जावे सांस दुगना हो जावे। मिल गया खुशियों का इशारा, खुद को मैंने फिर संवारा, खुद गया से हल्का पिटारा, क्योंकि मैं हूँ more than बारा। बारा 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 हो मेरा बारा 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 हो बारा। मैं भी more than बारा, मतलब मेरे खून में आयरन है 12 से ज्यादा। अगर 12 से कम हो तो हम अनीमिक हैं, और ये हर औरत के लिए हानिकारक है, उसके हेल्थ के लिए, उसके प्रेगनेंसी के लिए। अनीमिया फ्री इंडिया बनाने के लिए पहला कदम उठाइए, ब्लड टेस्ट कराइए। आपके खून में भी आयरन होना चाहिए 12 से ज्यादा। More than बारा।
I'm sure every one of us has enjoyed this video of More Than Bara. And on this note, I'd like to say that we are running 4 minutes early in this show, in this webinar, which is such a rare event in our webinars. And having said that, we will move on to our next session, which is a very interesting session of this webinar, a heart-to-heart, inspiring, emotional conversation, Unconditioning Yourself with Namita. Uncondition Yourself with Namita is a YouTube sensation which records thousands of views for each of its episodes. In a path-breaking move, we are bringing inspiring and real-life stories from women achievers in all fields to webinars for gynecologists. Mrs. Namita Thapar, who's an executive director of MCure Pharmaceuticals and the brain behind these series. Today, she will be in conversation with Mrs. Revati Roy. Mrs. Namita is a recipient of various prestigious corporate awards such as the Economic Times 40 Under 40 Award, Barclays Hurrens Next Gen Leader Recognition, Economic Times 2017 Women Ahead List, World Women Leadership Congress Super Achiever Award. She is a part of various government initiatives such as Women Entrepreneurship Platform and Digital Health Task Force by Niti Aayog and Champions of Change program initiated by Prime Minister Narendra Modi for G2B partnership in policy making. Namita serves as a board member on the India Regional Advisory Board of Fuqua School of Business. Outside of work, Namita is passionate about improving women's health in India and promoting youth entrepreneurship. I welcome you, Mrs. Namita Thapar, to our webinar.
Thank you, Ritu. Thank you for your kind words. And with that, I'd like to welcome Revati. Revati, I have read up so much about you and seen all your YouTube videos. And I must say, it's such a pleasure to finally connect with you, though digitally. And I hope that in better times, we can all meet in person. I'm not going to go with this script. I'm just going to speak impromptu about Revati based on whatever I've read up. And she's truly, truly an inspiring woman leader. She created Asia's first taxi service. So she's absolutely a fabulous entrepreneur who's received many, many accolades, many awards. The list goes on. She's been on the cover of Fortune, Forbes. What's interesting is that there's a book on her called Who is Revati Roy? And a 30-minute film, which has been anchored by Anurag Kashyap called Rags to Riches. And we're all going to see her very shortly, her story in a movie made by John Abraham. So this is a woman who wears many hats and has done remarkable work in the field of women entrepreneurship. She's trained more than 2,000 women as taxi drivers and plans on reaching a number of 1 lakh and more very soon. So with that, Revati, thank you once again for joining us this evening. And I have a few informal questions. If I've missed out on anything, please feel free to add whatever I may have missed. So let's start with a very general question on, tell us about your entrepreneurial journey. How did it all start? What triggered the entrepreneurial journey? And then I know you've done multiple things. So tell us about everything that you have ventured into.
First of all, thank you so much for having me on this. And Namita, your uncondition yourself is something that I have watched and it's wonderful. So we are mutually fond of each other. So thank you so much for having me here. Well, my entrepreneurial journey, like you said, you've read a lot, but for me to put it in a couple of minutes, let me just tell you that entrepreneurship sometimes is a designed career, you know, but sometimes it just happens, and you don't know that you're actually becoming an entrepreneur. And also, nowadays entrepreneurship is so much more formatted and so much more structured. There are so many platforms for people to, for children or youngsters to actually start their journey. I don't think in my time, I mean, I'd say my time because I'm now 61 years old, and at, when I started about maybe 14, 15 years back, we didn't have these kind of platforms. I mean, even to make a business plan, which was probably just an Excel sheet, it was tough. I didn't know all that, but of course I learned it. But I learned it during my course of becoming an entrepreneur. So the story is this: I didn't have any great skill, which one could. I was not an engineer, not a doctor, not an architect. I was not technically anything great that I had. The only thing I was really fond of, and I think I do it extremely well, is driving. I don't think that anybody on this earth can drive better than me. And I'm very, very pompous about it because I really think that I drive very well. And my passion is cars. I get very excited when I see vehicles. I just love to have a steering in my hand. And I'm a professional rally driver. So I've done about 85 car rallies. I've won 80 of them. So for me, rallying was my passion. Cars was my passion. I mean, children used to go to college to get degrees, and I wanted to turn 18 to get a driving license. So, my fundas in life were all different. But I never ever thought that I could build an empire with driving. It was so simple that, of course, I started with a very, on a tragic kind of situation because I lost my husband in 2007. And after he was in a comatose state for about 2.5 years, and then he passed away. And I really didn't know what to do because I was 47 then. At 47, to enter a corporate world, even with I'm a master's in economics. But at that point of time, at an entry level at 47, no one's going to take you because you really don't have any kind of experience. Today, things are different. Today, people may want you to join because you have some experience, but things were very different that time. So the only thing I really thought of was, why don't I drive a taxi? Because reason being that I'm a teetotaler, I don't drink and smoke. So I was a perfect bakra for all my friends to drop them back after they got drunk. And it is such a ungrateful job, because if you ever called any friends to ask whether they've got over the hangover, they won't even remember that I dropped them. So it was one of those days that I was taking some of my drunken friends home, and somebody kept backseat driving, and imagine somebody doing that to me because I think I'm the best driver, and imagine somebody actually telling me how to drive. I got so angry. I said, I think I should start a cab service, and that cab service should be only for girls. So that it's just happened like a bingo moment in my life. And that was one of the things that actually made me just say that, forget it, I'm going to I was in deep debt. My husband, because he was had been in a comatose state, we'd spent crores of rupees on him, so I there was no money. I had children to bring up, so there was really nothing that I had. And so it was crazy. It was just crazy about how things were going. And I didn't come from a really, I had another social issue, which was uh, which was kind of social ostracism, you can say, because when my husband was in a comatose state, and I had, we I had no, I all our money was blocked. We had a joint account, and I had no access to that money. I had borrowed some money. I couldn't return the money. There were some cases filed against me. I was put behind bars, and it's not easy in India to for a woman to come out and actually live a normal life. So post that, I actually set up my business, and you can imagine the kind of social ostracism that one would have had to go through to do whatever I had to do to set up my own business. So the concept of the um, women's cab service also actually initiated when I was behind bars. I saw a lot of women in prison who were there for multiple reasons, and they had already got their bail, but they never had 5,000 rupees to pay and get out. I used to see that, and I used to feel, what if, these people, not these people, anybody can just get skilled? What if they stand on their own feet? They can do so much more. And it was a spark which came into my head when I was there, actually. That I said, I must empower women with a skill. That's how I actually started. I said that, I have a skill. I have a skill which I can actually impart to other people, other women, make them stand on their feet. So my entrepreneurial journey really started from there, and I launched it sometime in 2007 March on International Women's Day. And then we've of course grown.
That is so inspiring, Revati. And, thank you for speaking with such candor about the personal challenges that you
Yeah.
faced, which in a way inspired you to become who you are
Yes.
today. So that was spoken with such absolute humility and candor, which very few women can do. So thank you for that.
There's
That
nothing to there's nothing to hide, in the sense that I I mean I those days were very tough, extremely tough. But that's what I want to bring out, that however tough the days are, there is hope.
but what helped you? That just brings me to another question. What helped you in those dark moments to find that inner strength? So, we all have to look for inspiration somewhere. It could be a person, a situation. Who's your inspiration? Who's your role model? What made you look positively when you were going through some of these darkest moments?
See, I admire a lot of women, men. I admire you too. And but I when it comes to inspiration, I get inspired by anybody. I mean, I actually get inspired when one of my girls who tells me something. But if I very strongly believe, very, very strongly, that if you keep looking for inspiration outside of you, you're going to find a reason to fail. Because you may get up one morning and say that, I look up to that lady or man or whatever, but she didn't inspire me today. So today my day is not good. I very seriously look at inspiration within myself. I think every moment, and it's not that I don't have bad moments. Of course, everybody has bad moments. There are days when you get up with a sick feeling, you get up with a sinking feeling. However, I'm sure everybody does. Whether you have money, you don't have money, you have children, you don't have children, you get up with those kind of so the what kept me going, in those dark moments was, I think, I used to just cry initially. I was there I was in the Baikla jail for 45 days, and then five different police stations for a total of 45 days. So it was 3 months. I used to shut my eyes. There were days when I just spent crying. Just spent crying. I mean, I just thought, I said, I don't know whether I'm ever going to go out. I didn't know the legal system. I didn't know anything. I didn't know. I had never been to a lawyer's place. I didn't even know what it looked like. I never been to a police station. I didn't know what it looked like. And so it was like, I said, my children were outside. My children were, growing up on their own. My husband was in a coma that time. And I used to feel the thing that I prayed for was is to keep praying that let him be okay, because I don't want to be in this situation here. And if something happens to him, what am I going to do? It's going to be terrible. Really speaking, what kept me going was, I one fine day decided no crying anymore. I am sure that, I will come out of this. I am dead sure I'm going to come out of this. And I said to myself that come what may, now let it be. There's somebody, my mother was working for me to get me out. My family was doing everything they could. It was that one hope that I am going to change lives. That dynamic moment which changed me was when I kept seeing those women and I kept saying that these are the lives which I have to change. That kept me going. And I said, I have to go out and I have to make sure that I am okay to make sure that I'm able to change thousands of lives.
That is so beautiful, Revti. And talking about all these women and the lives that you've changed, quick question on do you think it's very challenging for women to be in the workforce in India? Because, the women workforce participation used to be 37% and it came down to 27% pre pandemic. I'm afraid to think what that number may be if a post pandemic survey is done. So, do you think in India it's very challenging for women to be in the workforce, and what are some of those challenges, and how have you helped your women overcome these challenges?
So, Namita, I think fundamentally women coming out in a social, contours of the way we live, the social fabric of the way we live, it's invariably that the women are looking after the house, whether you like it or not. Whether it's a Nita Ambani, whether it's a Michelle Obama, you, whether it's Namita, whether it's me, you would be worried when you step out of the house to think, what is my child going to eat when they come back home? Very simple and very basic. We are fortunate to have help at home. So, women coming out is definitely difficult. Multiple reasons, biological reasons, childbirth. The families have to move on. What does one do? She is going to give birth. She is going to get pregnant. She's going to, she's going to be, she has to stay at home. She's lost her time. She's lost her time that time. What does she do? So it is very difficult for women to come out. And as far as how we have, kind of got hold of the situation and try, because we are an all women organization, so we face it even more than anybody else. And I see simple reasons like I have to attend the PTA. If that woman does not go for the PTA, I mean, she might face terrible problems at home. Terrible. So we have to also make sure that she's balancing. So we do a lot of mentoring, a whole lot of mentoring. And for us, the kind of work that I do with women is related to a skill acquisition. I'm not saying that a sales job is less important. There are a lot of skill needed in that also. But here I'm talking about a technical acquisition of a skill, which is driving and riding. It takes a little more than anything else, because also most of these girls come from the below poverty line families. Who would want to become a driver? I mean, if they have a KPO job or a BPO job, they would rather take that than take a driver's job, because driver is not the most idolized job even in any segment, and that too women. Imagine. So when I started, I actually became a cab driver myself. I drove for 10 months as a taxi driver, and probably the best time of my life. Yeah, because I love driving, it really didn't matter to me what I was doing. So women do have a lot more difficulties than men to come out of the house, and we have to accept it. If we build an ecosystem within the families of supporting them, I think that really helps. But we're still a long way off. But it's improving. I'm sure it's improving.
And that brings me to an important question. So because I think we just have 5 minutes left. The question I'm always intrigued when I meet inspiring women like you is the reason we named our YouTube channel Uncondition Yourself is because we felt that there's a lot of childhood conditioning, social conditioning, where women put a lot of barriers, and self sort of limit themselves. And we want to break these taboos. We want to destigmatize a lot of issues and empower women. So what is the one advice that you would like to give our women in India? And the one thing that you feel they should do. So my advice always is that women are great at time management, but terrible at guilt management. And I've suffered from this disease myself, right? And it took me a long time to get over it, and to become my productive and positive self once I got rid of that guilt. So what is that one uncondition yourself, or that one taboo you want to break, or that one advice you want to give to our women today?
In most of my talks, this is a very cliched thing that I speak normally, when somebody asks me about it. Dreams are free. Women must learn to dream, because unless you dream, I don't think it's even possible to think about what you want to do actually. So I think one must first uncondition yourself that that you're not supposed to dream about yourself. What do you want to do? Or where do you want to reach? And I think that's what is my advice to every woman, wherever they are on the face of this earth. Dreams are free. Please dream, and dream big.
Oh, that is so beautifully said. I just got a message from a couple of people that take 2-3 more minutes. We want to hear more from Revati. So that I believe is a very positive sign. You spoke about a couple of setbacks in terms of your husband's health and the time you had to spend in jail. Can I also ask you for a failure or setback you faced in your ventures as a professional or as an entrepreneur? That
Oh,
was really tough on you, and then how you overcame that?
oh, plenty. I mean, I think one a day. So I think every entrepreneur faces not only problems, disaster. I mean, I think I have been disastrous at some decisions that I've taken. Uh, but yeah, I accept that I've taken the wrong decisions. I was not born uh, to not make mistakes in my business, so I made them. The biggest challenge was, is, always will be when your business plan says that you want to grow exponentially at 10x, but your funds are never at 10x. So I think one of the biggest problems we ever face is finance, and that happens in any business. And also, especially we are a very heavy capex business, because we have vehicles, we have, so how do we invest money? Nobody's going to give us money as a startup. So you'll end up, sharing. I also had my first venture was wrongly done. So, there's so many.
What was that venture? The first venture?
Same, the cabs only. But I just
Okay.
was not equipped to handle problems. I sold off equity at nothing. When you're younger and when you're a first time entrepreneur, you think that the first person who comes to you is the best investor that you have. So you're willing to give away anything that you want just to get that name. I also did it. So, but went wrong, drastically went wrong. Realized it very quickly. Didn't make that mistake again. So
You always learn, right? And how many cities are you operating your taxis in, Revati, now?
no, we don't. I don't do passenger movement at all now.
Okay,
I
so
am
what is
into
the core business
logistics.
now?
My logistics. I'm doing last mile delivery. So we're
Okay,
doing
okay.
last mile delivery for two-wheelers and four-wheelers with almost all e-com companies. And so when you see girls coming riding on two-wheelers and delivering, that's what we do. We were in 12 cities pre-pandemic, and
Fantastic.
we've had to shut down 10.
Oh,
So yeah, but we're slowly getting back. We're getting back
okay.
because, and for us, the bigger problem is that as social distancing norms are what they are laid by the government, across India, we are into a business where literally, when you're teaching, you have to have that proximity, especially two wheelers. We're not allowed right now to do the training. So
So two-wheelers is mostly on motorbikes or scooters?
we've almost moved into EVs.
Okay.
Yeah. So we are a very dynamically progressive company in terms of keeping with the times.
And
So,
EVs is not giving any issues in terms
oh
of
my God,
charging the batteries and all the other issues?
they are just fabulous. I mean, with petrol prices at 105, we are good with EVs.
That is truly fantastic. So
Yeah.
you're not just an entrepreneur, but an entrepreneur with a conscience who's symbolizing green energy,
Yeah.
sustainability,
It's
environmentally
very,
conscious businesses.
it's amazing. I mean, when we started off, I started with just two EVs, but I mean, it's like charging a mobile. you know it's just and also the kind of business we do is geofencing kind of thing. We're just within 5 to 7 kilometers. At most we'll do 50, 70 kilometers a day, each two-wheeler. So it's more than enough for a battery to be charged.
Wow. See, every question I ask, I learn something new. But Revati, this has been truly fabulous. And we've been speaking for almost 25 minutes and time just flew. And like I said, I wish you all the very best. The pandemic is slowly subsiding. I hope you get back to your 12 cities. More power to you.
More.
12 and more, of
No,
course.
we want to be in 100 cities.
Absolutely. More power to you.
Yeah.
More power to your girls.
Yeah.
And may you inspire many, many more with your grit, your candor, your resilience. You've truly inspired us today.
You know, Namita, my girls are my rock stars. I mean, without them, I am nothing. Because of them, I am what I am. I mean,
Oh, that is so
you should see each of my girls. They're just amazing. I mean, you know, they can just come and they tell me I am their inspiration. It's the other way around. They are my inspiration. I mean,
That
they
is
come
so
from
beautiful.
very
I can feel
defeated
it in your
backgrounds.
voice. I can feel it in your
I
voice.
just
The
love
way a
them.
mother talks about her baby.
Yeah.
That's how the pride you're talking about your girls. And that's why those women will do so well under you, because you're all heart and you're all good
I'm
wishes.
only heart. I'm only heart. Not all heart. I'm only heart.
Super, super, Revati. Thank you so much for your time. And
Thank
I
you
see
so
Dr.
much.
Jaideep here. Dr. Jaideep, I want to give you a special thank you, because if it wasn't for this webinar series, I wouldn't have got to meet an incredible woman like Revati. And Revati, I hope this is the first of many more interactions you and I will have to uplift and empower more women pan India. Let's work together.
Anytime. Love to. Thank
Thank
you so
you.
much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Ritu, before you say, Namita, at the risk of sounding like a mutual admiration society, thank you for those kind words, but I must thank you, because this whole uncondition yourself idea is entirely you. And to find someone like Revati to come and speak to us, I am inspired. I seriously am very, very, very inspired. I mean, thank you so much. That was easily one of the most brilliant pieces of conversation I have heard. And really, I mean, I'm a gynecologist. We typically talk a lot and we never run out of words. But for this time, I think I have run a little bit out of words. So thank you very much for coming to this webinar. Thank you.
Fabulous, fabulous. Wonderful. Thank you for a lovely evening.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Back to you, Ritu.
Thank you, Ms. Namita, and thank you, Mrs. Revati Roy. It was such a candid, nice, inspiring conversation. And I truly was so inspired, and I'm sure our audience was too. And I really liked the take home message that was dream on, dreams do not cost you anything. So thank you for that. And having said that, I'll request Sagar to play the next video, please.
Dydrofem, faith delivered. Dydrofem is bioequivalent to Innovator at 25% lower cost. It is made using complex photon bombardment and purification process. Dydrofem's structure is exactly like the reference dydrogesterone structure. This brand is brought to you by Dr. Mukund Gurjar, rated as one of the top 75 scientists in India by CSIR. Dydrofem is brought to you by Encure, India's #1 company in women's health, most trusted by gynecologists. It is for patients with recurring pregnancy loss, history of miscarriage, and defective luteal phase. It has better potency, bioavailability, and tolerability than progesterone. Dydrofem, Encure's dydrogesterone, proud to be made in India.
Thank you, Sagar. With that, we move on to our next very intriguing session for tonight is an unconventional panel discussion, procedures in the gynecological OPD, which will be moderated by none other than our very own beloved Dr. Bhaskar Pal. Sir, and can I have his CV, please? Thank you. Dr. Bhaskar is a senior consultant gynecologist at Apollo Hospital, Calcutta. He is a chair of AICC RCOG, a vice president of IAGE, president of Bengal Obstetrics and Gynecological Society, and a FOXY representative to SAFOG 2021-23. Welcome, sir. I request you to please take over the panel.
Thank you, Ritu. And my sincere thanks. Can I share my screen, please, Sagar? And my sincere thanks to Jaideep for inviting me and giving me a very difficult job. Jaideep calls me up on a Friday evening and says, would you do a panel on this subject on Monday night? And for those who've used to my panels, most of them always accuse that I speak a lot. But because of the short notice, I think today what I have done, learning from Jaideep, is distributed the job to my 6 eminent panelists who will do most of the talking. This is a very interesting idea of Jaideep's of 12 on 12, and he told me that he'll do 12 programs in 12 and on the 12th of every month. I also noticed, whether it is by coincidence or by design, there are only 12 names on the flyers and 12 photos. So I thought I would do something on 12. So I've got 12 questions and 2 to each panelist. And for one of these questions, they will not share their screen, but for one of these questions where they'll demonstrate the procedure, they will share the screen. I have Dr. Anahita Chauhan, Dr. Anshu Raina, Dr. Charmila Ayavu, Dr. Munjal Pandya, Dr. Surekha Tayade, and Dr. Vaishali Kode Nayak. Sagar, would you, if I stop sharing, would you please share their CVs so that I can introduce them formally? Sagar, Ritu, whoever's got the CVs.
I'll just call up Sagar. 1 second.
So I'm here only, sir.
Okay, I've got the CVs to project. Yeah. Dr. Anahita Chauhan, a very close friend and senior from my days in Mumbai, is an honorary consultant at Saifi and St. Elizabeth Hospital. She is a professor. She was a professor and unit head at St. GS Medical College and KM Hospital in Mumbai. She's currently the vice president of the Mumbai Obstetric and Gynecological Society and the first joint editor of the Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology of India. She has been a postgraduate teacher with more than 30 years experience. Her fields of interest are high-risk obstetrics, adolescent health and contraception, and urogynecology. And Anahita is a wonderful person at heart. Next slide, please. We have Dr. Charmila Ayavu, an eminent academician who's did her MD from Grant Medical College, Mumbai. Looks like most people have a Mumbai connection today. She was the chairperson of the Clinical Research Committee of FOXI from 2016 to 18. Is currently an ICOG Governing Council member, National Coordinator for the UNICEF FOXI PCA, and the National Coordinator for the MEDHA FOXI PG program. WHO, CRO, MDSR India member since 2021, a past secretary of the Trichy ONG Society, president of the Menstrual Hygiene Management Consortium from 2018 to 2020, joint secretary of the Gestosis India, and joint treasurer of IFS Tamil Nadu chapter. Welcome, Charmila. Next slide, please. We have Dr. Vaishali Kode Nayak, who's currently the general secretary of the Pune Obs and Gynae Society. She's professor and head at Maimer Medical College, Pune. She's a consultant in critical care obstetrics at Ruby Hall Clinic, Pune. She's fellow in maternal and fetal medicine from National University, Singapore, university examiner for undergraduate and postgraduate examiner, international examiner for Royal College of Surgeons of London, a master trainer for FOXI Violence Against Women, conducted many national workshops and is working currently with THERA, contributed articles to many books and journals, various publications in national and international journals, and faculty for national and international conferences. Next slide, please. We have Professor Surekha Tayade, a bundle of energy, who's the chairperson of the Global Women's Health Task Force Network, TUFH USA. She's a founding member and vice chair for the Women and Health Together for the Future South Africa National Mentor Quality Improvement of Lakshya program of the Government of India, master trainer in emergency obstetric care, critical care in obstetrics, and maternal near miss of the Government of India. She's an expert committee member for the National Guidelines for Obstetric HDU, ICU, and national guidelines for maternal near-miss, co-leader of the Maternal Near-Miss Project National and State Rollover of GOI, co-leader of the Maternal Death Audit Project Quality Assurance at national and state level. She has over 100 publications. She's involved with 16 projects, has contributed chapters in books, published books. She's reviewer of 8 international journals, and she's a past president and secretary of the Shavagram Obs and Gynae Society, member of several committees of FOXY, and works in the community on violence against women through global health, through training, education, and service. She's a member of Board of Studies of PIMS, DU, Pravera, and MUHS Nasik. She's a winner of the Savitribai Phule Award and Dr. Anand Gione Award. Next slide, please. We have 2 young panelists, Dr. Anshu Raina, who's from Noida, senior consultant at Apollo Cradle Hospital at Greater Noida. She's the secretary of the Noida Obs and Gynae Society. She was a joint organizing secretary of the North Zone UVA Foxy conference in 2019 and a former joint secretary of Noida Obs and Gynae Society. And formerly, she was a consultant with Max Hospital, Noida. And the last panelist is young Dr. Munjal Pandya, who's an assistant professor at the AMC Met Medical College, Ahmedabad in Gujarat. He's the honorary secretary of the Ahmedabad Obs and Gynae Society. He's received the Shirish Daftari Young Talent Award from AOGS for the year 2017-18, has co-edited a book on male infertility in 2019, winner of Dr. Kamini Rao West Zone Yuva Foxy oration for the year 21, has published many papers and chapters, and he's a multifaceted personality with his hobbies include painting, playing the guitar, singing, writing, tennis, and photography. Could you stop the share, please? I go back to my share, and my first question is to Munjal. Munjal, for the OPD setup, what kind of advice would you give to people in terms of the room, in terms of your linen, and in terms of your light?
Thank you so much, sir, for kind introduction and for this particular panel. With regards to room, the consulting room and the examination room would be a little bit separated part because of maintaining of privacy as well as for changing and dressing and undressing of the patient. So room should be properly ventilated and would be having a good partition so as to maintain the privacy of the patient. Linen would be most of the times we use this autoclaved linen as with regards to the number of patients, proper calculation, or we can go for disposable linen just to avoid any kind of spread of infection or contamination to other patients. And the light is something which we would be having, nowadays we have, sir, shadowless lights, LED lights, but any light from the shoulder focusing onto the, angulated into the examination part would be preferred one, so as to have the proper examination. And again, to avoid the colorful lights, we would prefer the white ones, so as to not get distracted with various colors or to diagnose infections properly.
Thank you.
Master sir, can we go for slideshow, please? Full screen?
I'm sorry. Thank you, Munjal. I think 3 important points that you've made, that the room, in terms of the room, the privacy is very important because our patients are gynecological. Most of the times they will require examination. So there should be facility for undressing and dressing, and that has to have privacy. Either you have a separate room or you have well-partitioned room. What kind of light one uses is not important, but it is important to have a spotlight so that you can visualize the cervix very well. There's no gynecological examination is complete without a inspection and speculum examination. In terms of linen, yes, we can go for autoclave linen. Disposable linen, I think it's difficult to go for. The other option is you can use your linen, and on top of it, you can use the paper rolls which you change after every patient. Thank you, Munjal. Anshu, do you need a chaperone?
Yes, sir. Chaperone is a must for any kind of OPD procedure. For an appropriate trained assistant should be present during any kind of cervical instrumentation procedure. That is a must thing. It should be present. So it basically required for the appropriate trained assistant who can monitor the condition of the woman and assist in any kind of emergency should be present for any kind of OPD procedure.
Okay, Anshu, as male gynecologists, we know that we should always have a female chaperone. As a female,
Yeah, that is also, it's
as
a
a
very
female
important thing.
gynecologist, do you think you need a chaperone when you're examining a patient, when you're not doing
Yeah,
a procedure?
yeah, even for the all that examination, and in both male and female, both the chaperone is must
I
nowadays.
think whether you are a male gynecologist or a female gynecologist, having a chaperone when you are examining the
Is the
patient
must.
is a must. Thank you, Anshu, for pointing that out. My second issue is that during consultation, ever you felt the need of having a chaperone?
During consultation, also sometimes, because privacy is the first thing which should be while taking a history, that is required. But during any kind of consent, if you are taking with the patient for the any daycare procedure, that OPD procedure, that time also the chaperone is must.
I think there are times when we feel a bit comfortable having a chaperone, even when we are, suppose there's a young girl who's come alone or somebody who appears slightly vulnerable. It is a good idea to have a female chaperone even during consultation.
Yeah.
Vaishali, do we need a consent before doing an internal examination? And if we need, then what kind of consent should we have?
Yes. Thank you so much for this question. We usually consider that we have implied consent when we have examination. But while doing internal examination, this is an intimate examination, and it's better to have a verbal consent in presence of a chaperone. Examine where we explain that what exactly we are going to do, for what we are going to do, and why this examination is needed. Consent which is needed for procedures like pelvic examination, pap smear, or any minor procedure we would like to do. And the others like IUCD insertion or we need to have a written consent where we have explained everything and then we tell them to go ahead with the procedure.
All right. I think there are three kinds of consent. One is an implied consent, and one is a verbal consent, and one is a written consent. For doing an internal examination or examining a patient, I think implied consent is not good enough. Because you cannot go and argue that the patient allowed me to examine, and that's implied consent. And that's where it is important that what Dr. Vaishali has said, that it is a verbal consent, which means that you've explained what you're going to do and asked her, it is okay if I do it, and in presence of a chaperone. I think that's a very important take-home points. Shamila, what kind of basic instruments would you have in your OPD? I'm not asking for procedures, where you're saying you're thinking only of doing a speculum and internal examination and abdominal examination.
If the linen is arranged and the light has been arranged in Munjal and a chaperone is there, as Anshu said, and you've got a verbal consent from the patient, you can go ahead with an examination. And in the morning when you come to your OPD, you make sure that all the instruments are there. Many times it will not be available and you'll be stuck when you're starting. So it's always better to make sure that you have all the basic instruments. And the basic instruments I consider are necessary will be gloves, will be lignocaine jelly, and then the instruments will be a Cusco's bivalve speculum, a SIM speculum, and I have got something called an anterior vaginal wall retractor. It is very useful when you have a SIM speculum, and you need always an artery forceps with you, which is mandatory. Sometimes she may just ask for a copper T removal while you're examining, and you cannot make a wait and then run around for the instrument. So keep an artery forceps. Sometimes you may need an alley also, but for that you need to explain to the patient before you use, and you need to have long artery forceps sometimes, because sometimes the access may not be enough with a short artery forceps. And I have a straight forceps, I'll have a suture removal forceps, I will have, suture removal scissors, uterine sound, a valsellum, and suture cutting scissors. These I think are mandatory in any OPD of gynec.
Yeah, so that's I think when we discuss about speculum examination, we will discuss about the speculums a little more in detail, because it is very strange how geographically the usage of different kinds of speculum varies. When I trained in Bombay, every patient we would see with a SIM speculum and an anterior vaginal retractor. Whereas in this part of the country and say in United Kingdom, people are more used to a Cusco speculum than anything else. But you need to have a dressing set. And as Dr. Chamila said, you need to have an artery forceps and make sure everything is there rather than running around before that. Anahita, COVID protection in the OPD.
Thank you, Bhaskar. And I think this is extremely important. Over the last 15 or 16 months, we have all evolved our own sort of protocol for COVID protection. But if we have to describe it in 2 or 3 areas, one would be protection for us as doctors and our staff. And the second is the protection for the patients. Uh, I think the first point is we should minimize our interaction with patients as far as possible. And of course, I'm not going to go in the details, but telemedicine or teleconsultation can replace some of our physical consultation. That's the first point we need to be clear on. The second is that when patients do visit our OPD, we should limit the number of patients per day, limit the number of appointments per day, stagger our appointments so that we don't have a crowded waiting room, make sure that in the waiting room we have either marked out some chairs or which are not to be used, or we have spaced the chairs properly. When the patient enters our OPD, she should be ideally with only one accompanying person and not a big crowd of relatives. Of course, the temperature screening should be mandatory at the entry. Sanitization should be mandatory at the entry point of the OPD block, even before they enter the doctor's chamber. The other important point is that do not allow patients to enter your clinic without mask. Very often the patient sits across me and puts down the mask thinking that it'll be a better way of talking. And I sometimes come across rudely by saying, see that your mask is on your face at all times. The clinic staff should also maintain the hand hygiene, sanitization, etc. And initially we were wearing some sort of protective gear in the OPDs ourselves. Including a disposable PPE or a reusable PPE with a face shield was used. Currently, we are not that particular, though we are very careful. Once the patient enters the doctor's chamber, there should be enough of a gap, or the patient should be asked to sit at a few feet away from the doctor while taking the history. That ideally you should have an acrylic sheet on your table so that there is less chance of direct interaction with the patient. The other important change in the practice is that I don't always examine all patients internally. And I would be very careful in which patients really do need an internal examination. And coming to the linen, in my practice, I do use disposable sheets, both for the bed as well as to cover the patient. But in certain setups where this is not feasible, you could, use autoclavable sheets and, as you said, cover it with a disposable paper rolls. I think this is important in the COVID protection. I don't know if I've missed anything, but
no, absolutely. Anybody in the panel wants to add anything to it? Then I'll sum up. I think there are several points Anahita has made, and I will try to sum it up that for the patient, I think it is important that we do a thermal screening, number one. Number two is that we insist that the patient wears a mask. And number three, we limit the number of attendants. The Western world is much more strict. And in US and UK, if you are physically able, you cannot take an attendant with you, even if you are pregnant. You have to go and see the doctor alone. We haven't become like that, but we still insist that not more than one attendant. I understand that people practice in different circumstances. If it is possible, make sure that there's a 3 feet distance at least between you and the patient. If not, then it is a good idea to put those plexiglasses, which are now available very easily, the acrylic sheet that Anahita was asking about. The other thing is very important is that you limit your contact time with the patient. And that is exactly, again, what Anahita was saying, that we know that you try and limit the contact time surely to less than 15 minutes, if preferably even less than that. The other important point, which we've realized that earlier we were erring on the safer side, but now we've realized what is your most important point is your N95 mask. It's a good idea to have another surgical mask on top of it, because most of us reuse our N95 masks. And the second point is hand hygiene. Whether you wear a glove to touch the patient or you touch the patient's papers, you need to wash your hands, preferably with soap and water. in between patients and then sanitize. I think, the sanitization says that you should sanitize your hand for 25 seconds. And 25 seconds is an awfully long time to sanitize just with the sanitizer. So I feel more comfortable washing my hands. Thank you very much.
Can I just add?
Yeah.
I did not mention about the gloves because the gloves give you a false sense of security.
Absolutely. I have stopped wearing gloves. I wash. If I touch the patient, I wash my hands with soap or water and then sanitize. And there are arguments against the glasses, against using the gloves. I've stopped wearing a spectacle or a face shield because halfway through the first wave, I realized that my spectacles were on the top of my head and I had forgotten to bring them down, and realized that nothing happens if your mask and hand washing is strict.
Yes.
I have finished 5 of my questions, and now I will stop sharing and I'll give it over to Munjal, who will describe the speculum and PV examination. Munjal, please share your screen.
Yes, sir. Yes.
The 6 questions now will go out to the 6 panelists, and the 12th question is reserved for Surekha.
So I'll just quickly go through the per speculum and per vaginum examination covering the saline features. As previously discussed, we need to have a establishment of a quick rapport with regards to introduction of self as well as the introduction of the patient, making it comfortable for her to have a proper history as well as getting ready for examination. Washing of hands, as you said, sir, is a prerequisite again for before examining each and every patient. Explanation to the patient with regards to the procedure that we are going to have, as well as to have the freedom of at any point of time, if she feels uncomfortable or painful, she would ask us to stop the examination, and we need to obtain the verbal consent, as you said, sir, previously. We would request for chaperone because she will be helping in form of male gynec. We'll be having her in form of a little bit of comfort zone for the patient and for documentation purpose as well. So we need to take care of both the things with regards to chaperone. Preparation, again already mentioned, the gloves, which would be autoclaved one or the disposable one. Lubricant we need to use specifically for per vaginum examination, so as to avoid any kind of friction and pain, which may lead to again constriction of the vaginal walls, which will not allow us to have a proper examination. Paper towels, as you suggested, sir, we would be having an additional roll of paper towels over the traps. Emptying of bladder is must because we want to have a thorough examination, as well as we need to avoid pain with regards to the examination. Clothing, we would request a patient to undress herself below waist in a total privacy before taking her onto the table. Sometimes we can actually allow her to undress beneath the waist while on table as well, and we would enter afterwards with proper covering of the patient. And covering with the sheet is of utmost importance, again for the comfort zone of the patient, because we would be examining the pelvic part or the vulval examination. Abdominal examination is like lower abdominal examination with regards to inspection and palpation is must before proceeding with per speculum and per vaginum examination in forms of any scar or a little bit of palpable lump, if at all it is there in lower abdomen. We would be having a gross idea. With regards to external examination, we would position the patient in, we would have the patient in supine position with both the legs and stirrups. If the patient is not comfortable, we can have her heels on the edge of the table so that she would be comfortable for a longer part of examination if she is not comfortable with the stirrups. We need to inspect the vulva externally for any kind of scars, erythema, any kind of skin abnormalities, clitoromegaly, or secondary sexual characters with regards to hair distribution. We know that we have different scores or various scores with regards to the secondary sexual characters. Discharge, which might be there in form of pathology, like white curded discharge would suggest candidiasis, fishy odor would suggest bacterial vaginosis. So there are various infections, and we can get the idea from the character of the discharge and consistency of discharge, whether she is bleeding or not. Usually what we do is, if the patient is menses, we may not go for examination. But if she is not, and still she is having some spotting or bleeding spots in vagina, we would definitely go for further evaluation. Swellings of vulva in form of bartholin, which may be there in at around 4 o'clock or 8 o'clock position, or any other swelling or cyst or even boil, which is there in vulva. And With regards to cuffing, on on external examination, we may be able to see the cervix coming out of vulva in case of prolapse. On post-speculum examination, we would be having, as you suggested, sir, we would be having two types of speculum. Preferably, one is sim speculum, which needs to be used with anterior vaginal retractor, and the other one is Cusco's self-retaining speculum. The third one we would have is transparent bivalve speculum with a light source, which would enlighten the vaginal wall, which will allow us to have the vision of all the vaginal walls at the same time. So we need to lubricate the speculum before introduction. With regards to sim speculum, we would introduce it horizontally preferably, and then we will rotate a little bit of 90 degree, and with the help of anterior vaginal wall retractor, we would examine the vaginal walls. With regards to Cusco speculum, theoretically they say that anterior vaginal wall is pretty much sensitive as compared to the posterior one. So while inserting, we would make sure that the anterior blade doesn't hurt the patient, and we would be having an inclined entry into the vagina, and then we can open up Cusco speculum with regards to proper exposure of vaginal wall. We would look for any abnormal discharge, erosions on the cervix or ulcerations, growths or bleeding or polyp, or we would be taking biopsy if previously discussed. And removal of speculum again is of utmost importance. We need to actually loosen up the valves with the help of unscrewing the joints, and with partially open speculum, we would gently remove it. With regards to speculum, it is easier to remove it without getting patient hurt. With regards to vaginal examination, obviously in per speculum and per vaginum, if we are not going or planning for pap smear, we would be using antiseptic solution for toileting from anterior to posterior part, just to clean the vulva or vagina before introduction of any kind of instruments. We will inform the patient that now we are inserting our fingers to examine the vagina. We would lubricate our gloves, the dominant hands, index and middle fingers, and we would separate the vulva with the help of non-dominant hands, the thumb and index finger, just to separate it gently. And then we would insert both the fingers of dominant hand. And while inserting, the palm would be facing laterally. And after insertion, it would be facing upwards, so that we can examine the fornices as well as the bimanual examination properly. As suggested in the figure, the lateral introduction, and then the palm would be facing upwards. Vaginal walls needs to be palpated. We can palpate even urethra. We can actually, palpate against pubic symphysis in the midline, and on both the sides of urethra we can palpate. And we would notice whether there is any kind of discharge in form of pus or anything from the urethra. In case of cervix, we would actually feel the position of cervix as well as the consistency and the cervical motion tenderness, which may be there, suggestive of pelvic inflammatory disease or even ectopic pregnancy. The fornices, all four fornices need to be palpated separately and gently. With regards to bimanual palpation of uterus, the non-dominant hand would be put on approximately 2 to 4 centimeter above the pubic symphysis, and the dominant hand would be having inside the vulva, in the posterior inside the vagina, in the posterior fornix, and we would palpate the size of uterus first, then the shape of uterus, consistency, position, and the tenderness of the uterus. After proper palpation of bimanual palpation of uterus, we would palpate the adnexa. We would have the internal fingers rotated in the left lateral fornix with regards to left adnexa, and the non-dominant hand, which is over the abdomen, would be in left iliac fossa. A gentle, deep palpation between both the hands would help us to assess the adnexa, whether there is any mass or any palpation or any cyst with regards to ovarian origin or even hydrosalpinx or pelvic inflammatory disease. And if there is any mass, we would tell the assistant or the chaperone to note down our findings. And on the right side, the adnexal examination can be repeated. So to complete both the examination, we would cover the patient again. We would explain the examination that it is now complete. We would provide the patient a little bit of privacy for dressing herself. And again, we would provide the paper towels for clean the parts and dispose the used instruments, or would send them to cleaning for reuse. And of utmost importance is documentation. We would document each and every finding with regards to our examination, so as to facilitate or allow us to come to the probable diagnosis, which would be confirmed with further investigations. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Manchal. Any of the panelists want to add anything?
Bhaskar, I wanted to add that previously we were all giving the patient dorsal position, bringing her to the edge of the table or putting her in stirrups. But most patients find the position of their legs elevated in a lithotomy or a semi-lithotomy very disturbing. And so at least I have stopped bringing them to the edge and using a sim speculum. I will be more comfortable, and patients are more comfortable with a Cusco speculum. The second point I wanted to add to what Munjal said is that it's not always necessary to clean the vulva, because that is a very sensitive part for the patient. And that's the point where they actually jump on the table. So maybe if you have enough lubrication on your glove, you don't always have to clean the vulva with an antiseptic solution. Of course, if you have a very large and busy OPD, yes, but otherwise, no.
Okay. I think one point I wanted to make, Anahita has already made. I remember when I went to do my MD in Bombay in Sion Hospital, all the patients in the OPD would be examined on a gynec table, and which is this U-shaped, so that we would sit down on a stool and examine the patient with a SIMS speculum and also with an anterior vaginal retractor. Not only some patients find it uncomfortable, the bigger problem is that people like me practice in different clinics, and we share the same room sometimes with a physician or surgeon. So except in the procedure room, we'll not find a gynec table. And that is why we moved essentially to a Cusco speculum. But while I think Munjal has made a very important point, most of the things that we do, we separate and do that. But we need to be extra careful when you're removing a Cusco speculum, because if a hair gets caught, it's going to be a problem. The other thing I think Munjal has said, that you ask the patient to empty the bladder, but there is only one condition where you do not ask the patient to empty the bladder. That is when you are assessing somebody with a complaint of prolapse or incontinence. That is when it is a better idea to examine her first with the full bladder. It is very important that especially in patients who present with a history suggestive of infection or a history suggestive of pelvic pain, that we inspect the vagina and the fornices very well. And many of the time you can miss an endometriotic nodule in the posterior fornix if you've not done a proper inspection. The other important thing that we never struck us actually, till Professor Shirish Shet taught us, he called it the Shirish Shet sign, that if you find the cervix pulled up in a patient of previous surgeries, you expect that this patient is going to have bad intra-abdominal adhesions. And we see that in endometriosis, we see that in previous surgeries. And that is again something which is very good to look at when you are planning a surgery. So I think the other point is that I think this is a personal choice. I start my PV with one finger when I realize the patient is comfortable and will manage and will not have a problem if we do two fingers. I think which speculum Munjal has addressed, and he's gone into systematic assessment. Yes, Vaishali.
Yeah, sir, even sometimes just dipping the Cusco speculum in normal saline, which is warm, gives a better feeling to the patient. Because sometimes in cold weather, rainy season, sudden that cold filled speculum gives us shivers.
I think
it's a
I don't do that, because our Cusco speculum comes pre-autoclaved, and if I put that in normal saline, gets a problem. But I warn the patient that you'll find it a little bit cold. If it's too cold, please tell me. And yes, Charmila, come in, please.
If you put a sim speculum, please turn it and then take it out. Don't take it out abruptly. That causes more.
Always. I think the same should go with a Cusco speculum, that you
collapse it and then take it out.
Yeah, put it and then turn it, just like Munjal said for PV. I think the same thing you do with sim speculum or a Cusco speculum, and the same thing you follow when you are taking them out. Okay. Anahita, next is I'll stop sharing, and it is now your turn to take us through pap smear.
Thank you, Bhaskar. I'll just share my screen in a minute. Are my slides visible?
Yeah, but you're on slide 5.
I'll put it on slideshow. So luckily for me, the previous speaker has already given us a lot of information about what we are going to do in the OPD for the examination. An important point which has already been mentioned is that we are going to take a verbal consent prior to doing the pap smear. There are broadly two types, the traditional one and what we do in Mumbai nowadays, which is the LBC for certain patients. And I'm just going to quickly go through all the steps in a brief manner. Of course, we have the examination table and a good light source. It's not important what light source, as long as you're going to illuminate the cervix. Bivalve speculum, you should have the autoclave tray with various sizes of your cuscos, or if you are using the sim speculum, you definitely require an anterior vaginal wall retractor as well. I have here with me the IS spatula, which we are all familiar with. I also have the endocervical brush, and I'm going to actually need both of them for doing an endo and ectocervical collection. In my clinic, I use a spray fixative, but if you are in a larger setup, you may want to use a Coplin's jar, which has the ether 95% solution, where you will dip your slides in the jar and send it to the lab. You need the container to transport it to the lab. And if you're using a regular spray fixative in the OPD, I have this very neat slide carrier, which has 2 glass slides with a part of the slide which is opaque, which I will label with the patient's name and other pertinent details. The major issue comes because you are not able to sample the transformation zone. And that is the reason why you need most cases to take 2 smears. We all know what the transformation zone is, so I'm not going in detail. But if the squamocolumnar junction is visible, you can simply use the spatula. And if this is the cervix, then I would actually put the elongated end into the cervix and rotate the spatula simply by 360 degrees for the first smear. In younger women, I may see the squamocolumnar junction very easily, and in older women, it may have receded within the cervical canal, in which case I would then use the cyto brush. Is it clear? Can you see the brush? And then I would go into the canal till I can see the last or the end of the bristles. Once I have reached that point, I will gently rotate it. I will not rotate this vigorously. I will rotate it only ideally 180 degrees. If I rotate it more than 360 degrees, it's likely that I may get blood on my brush, and that will interfere with the smear. So this is just the same images to show in the first case, where I would insert the longer end of the IS spatula into the canal and rotate it by 360. And of course, depending on where the transformation zone is, I may want to use the brush as well. So if it is visible 360 degrees, immediately I spread the sample onto the labeled slide. It's easy to first label the slide, and this is an important practical point. If you have an assistant or a nurse with you, she will do the labeling part. If you are alone with only a chaperone, it becomes a bit challenging. So first label the slide and fix the sample immediately using the cytofix. If you don't have the cytofix, immediately dip it into the Coplin's jar. Make sure that you're holding the spray at least 15 centimeters away from the slide, and spray the entire slide evenly in one go. If the squamocolumnar junction is not visible, as I said, you will use the cyto brush as well, but rotate the brush only by 180 degrees. Now, this slide is actually from another center where they put both ecto and endocervical smears on the same slide, but practically it is easier to put them on 2 separate slides and send it to the laboratory. This was about what we do in a larger setup, in a low resource setting. Ideally, nowadays, the liquid-based cytology is a better option. And the advantages of the thin layer liquid-based is that you get the use of a plastic broom. I'm actually going to open this broom to show you all. And I'm sure many of you have seen the broom. It's like a brush with longer bristles, and the broom has to be rotated into the cervical canal, and the cells that are collected, you will be able to collect better number of cells, which will be preserved for a longer time. And when the slides are prepared, it's a thin layer, and so you have a better sensitivity of the pap smear. the broom comes with its own fixative. And when you open the jar, the important point to remember is that you just put in the broom and then very simply just hold it at the edge of the thing and detach the broom into the cytofix. You don't have to struggle to cut it or break it. You saw how I just put it in and you just twist it against the side and the broom is sent to the lab in this bottle itself. So if you are in a setting where you can, where the patient is able to afford a thin layer cytology or a liquid based cytology, that would be preferable. If not, then of course the traditional would be the better option.
Okay.
I use typically a Cusco speculum. In fact, even if I can't visualize the cervix, sometimes with the Cusco speculum, either if my speculum is too short or the patient is too obese, I may ask the patient to slightly flex her legs onto the abdomen, and then I'm able to see the cervix.
Yeah, I think Anahita has answered all has covered all the points. You can either do it with a cytofix, or you can do it with a Coplin's jar, or you can do a liquid-based cytology. Of course, the LBC has got less false negative in terms of as compared to the traditional one. We actually put, Anahita, we do two samples, one with the spatula and one with the cytobrush, and we put them on one slide. We earlier used to put them on two slides, but around 10 years back, our pathology head told us you are unnecessarily increasing my work. So either vertically you put it on two sides, just like you showed, or you can put them transversely on two sides. Make sure you don't put one on the top of the other. And for the last 10 years, we've been doing pretty well with a single slide.
Right.
Surekha, you've not spoken, so this is, and we've got the best test copy. I will stop sharing my screen, and Surekha, please share your screen.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I will just would like to share my screen here. My topic is colposcopy, and it seems to be that it is, let me just see whether I can make it slideshow from the beginning. So I hope the slideshow is on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is considered to be a slightly more sort of a skilled procedure and not to be done routinely. There are some indications for colposcopy. First, let us look at those. These indications are like epithelial cell abnormalities, which have already been detected on the cervical cytology. Then positive high-risk HPV DNA in ASCUS triage, suspicious cervical lesions, even the vulvar or the vaginal neoplasia, history of in utero DS exposure, quite rare now, sexual partner of patients with genital tumors, oncogenic HPV, inappropriate guideline algorithms, some unexplained vaginal bleeding, postcoital bleeding, even positive screen tests for a cervicography or speculoscopy. So these are the indication for colposcopy. Usually we will be doing a cytology and the report, if there is some report suggestive or an HPV DNA, these are the usual common indications where we do the colposcopy. Let's see if it's moving. Yes. Now the objectives of the colposcopy are to determine the presence of a lesion, the invasive or the pre-invasive, localize the squamous columnar junction properly, identify the most severe disease, to take a biopsy and evaluate the extent of the disease if you're able to see it. Now this is the instrumentation. Here I'm showing a normal sort of a colposcope, which is having a binocular movable eyepiece, green filter to view the blood vessels. There's the objective lens here. We can see the knob for adjustment of the optics. There's the screw or the handle here to adjust the height, handle for fine focus here, and tilting arrangement. Then there's a stand for the colposcope. There is a fiber optic cable to deliver the light to the optics camera. There's a transformer, and again there's the stand. Here's again the light source here. So this is the colposcope. I will show the instrumentations which are required. Here is the tray which we usually need. There's a kidney tray here. Then we have the bottles of normal saline, 5% acetic acid and leucocidin. Monsell solution, if in case there is bleeding, if you take a biopsy, then maybe the Monsell solution is needed. Then again, the bottle containing the formalin, if you're taking the biopsy. Local anesthetic may or may not be needed. However, we keep it ready. Then jar containing the alcohol for cervical smear. We usually take the smear prior to the procedure, so that fixator is needed. Cotton tip file, swab stick, cervical cytology brush. Large cotton tip swab sticks are important. Vaginal speculum, we use the Cuscos. Then sponge holding forceps, vaginal sidewall retractor may be needed sometimes. Endocervical speculum is important. Endocervical curette, then dissecting forceps and punch biopsy forceps. So here I would just like to show the vaginal sidewall retractor, how it looks like. Here is the endocervical speculum. Here you can see how it looks like, and this is the punch biopsy forceps. Most of us, the audience must have are familiar with the punch biopsy forceps too. I just wanted to talk a bit about what is the original squamocolumnar junction and what is the new columnar junction, and where we should focus when we are doing the colposcopy. This is the transformation zone that is between the original and the new squamocolumnar junction. How do we identify the original squamocolumnar junction? This is by the most distant cervical crypt openings. Here you can see this arbitrary line going through these distal cervical crypt openings. This indicates the original squamocolumnar junction. This is the columnar epithelium here, the pinkish one, and here this outermost lining is the new squamocolumnar junction, and this is the area which we have to focus on, and that is the transformation zone. So when we are going for the colposcopic examination, so whatever previously my speakers have spoken, like, you know, the consent, we take a written consent for colposcopy, and because if the biopsy is needed, then that also we add to the consent here. We would like to explain the procedure to the patient. That's very important. And then of course the patient has to empty the bladder. The position of the patient, we have the dorsal position or the lithotomy position. Dorsal position also with the heels resting on the table, that also would suffice. And then we go ahead with the colposcopic examination. So what we have in our setting is a video colposcope. Video colposcope is where there's a camera and there is a system where the images are transformed to the screen. So instead of looking through the camera, we look at the screen when we are doing the colposcopic examination. So you can either have a normal type of colposcope, which you directly look through the lens and you can visualize the change, or you could have a video colposcope. Now, it's very important that you make the patient comfortable when you're using the Cusco speculum, and so that the patient doesn't jump off. As rightly said, most of the patients, you need to have a good judgment of what kind of or what size of speculum you're going to need, so that you can nicely visualize the cervix. So placing the Cusco speculum also is very important in case of a good visualization of the cervix is needed. Obtain the pap smear prior to doing any other instrumentation. You just take a pap smear. If needed, you could take a high vaginal swab if you're seeing some infection, if you're noting some infection. If POH examination needed, that also should be done prior to starting the colposcopic examination. After that, you perform the cervical colposcopy. How you do that? You focus the camera on the cervix, you visualize without cleaning anything, you just visualize and find out if there is any lesion, any white area before application also of the acetic acid. If you are seeing something white, all that lesion you should note initially. Then the mucus is cleaned with normal saline. Again, you visualize, you focus your camera and look at if there are any abnormalities of the vessel. Use the green filter. In our, we having a video colposcope, so 3 types of green filters are available with us. So green 1, green 2, green 3, you look at the vessels first, note down any abnormalities. After that, we'll apply the acetic acid. We use a 5% of acetic acid. Now, apart from the acetic acid, the concentration, what is important is the quality of the acetic acid. You know, we usually we advise that it should be a freshly prepared acetic acid. Like if I'm doing procedures in the morning, it should be prepared at the start of the day. That is, if I start my OPD at 9 a.m., so I usually advise my nursing staff that the acetic acid has to prepare that morning itself. Okay, so that's important. And the time of application of acetic acid is also important. The time which is recommended is 1 minute. So there have been studies like 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute. But what is recommended is that the acetic acid should stay on the cervix for a period of 1 minute. So there's a timer on the colposcope which you should press when you start applying the acetic acid, and then up to 1 minute, we just go on touching the cervix with the acetic acid and waiting for that 1 minute. As soon as that 1 minute is over, we switch off the timer and then start examining what are the changes. If there are any aceto-white areas, we note them. And we do have a paper on where we note down all our findings. We actually map the areas which we find abnormal, and accordingly, we will document our findings. So that is about the acetic acid. After that, we will, of course, visualize, we will again focus, improve the magnification, and we'll try to look at the margins, how the margins are, extent, all that will be noted. After application of acetic acid, we use the Lugol's iodine and with a swab stick. So with the swab stick, we'll apply the Lugol's iodine properly and look at whether the stain is taken up by the lesion and by the normal cervix also. We will try to, look at whether the stain have been taken. So after application of Lugol's iodine, again, we will visualize through the proper magnification. And meanwhile, at each step, we will take images also, as we have the video colposcope. The images also are taken so that a proper documentation is there. So look for a satisfactory colposcopy. What does that mean? A 360-degree view of the transmembrane zone. If it is not visible properly in case of where the maybe the new squamocolumnar junction has receded, we may use the endocervical speculum and try to visualize. Otherwise, we will note down in our documentation that the colposcopy was not satisfactory. So satisfactory colposcopy, proximal and distal end of the cervical lesion has to be noted. Any gross lesion or pathology is there, that to be noted. And not to forget to check for vaginal and vulvar lesions also. That's very important. So you're not just looking at the cervix, you should also look at the vagina. You should also look at any vulvar lesions. So again, the collection of the target biopsy, select the most severe lesion. The selection of the sharp instruments is also important. 2 to 3 mm biopsy has to be taken. It should be always colposcopically assisted one. And this biopsy should be from the squamocolumnar junction. If needed, use the Monson solution. If the cauterization is available and if the bleeding is more than what you are expecting, then cauterization may also be done. This can all be done in the OPD itself. However, that's why we do properly counsel the patient that this all may be needed, and a proper consent for the procedure is also needed. So what is a satisfactory colposcopy examination? 360-degree visualization of the squamocolumnar junction, proximal and distant extent of the cervical lesion is identified, and you are able to correlate. So just quickly, I will just show you few slides about how it looks like. So this is the transformation zone. Here you are able to see how you identify. So this is the Nabatean follicle here seen. You can see the regular branching tree appearance. So this is the normal look of the vessels. So regular long branching vascular tree pattern. That is what is normal. So this you can look at. Now this is the punctations. You can see this. We can see the end-on vessels here. I'll just
Rekha, I
show
think
how
we
they
will
look on
stop there.
colposcopy. Yes.
Rekha, I think we will stop there because our brief is procedure, not
Okay,
into.
sir. That is fine. That's fine, sir.
If you stop share, I'll go back to my share. Thank you very much. And I just want to highlight a few points that Surekha said. I think today when you talk of laparoscopy, everything is a video laparoscopy. You don't talk of video laparoscopy. But everybody here on this panel, except I think Munjal and Anshu, have been used to a laparoscopy prior to the introduction of video. So where we would bend through the laparoscope and see inside. So if you do not have a video colposcope, better get used to a video colposcope, because 5 years from now, you will not have a non-video colposcope. I think Surekha's made a very important point that if you're doing a colposcopy, you better have an endocervical speculum on your tray, because many a times an unsatisfactory colposcopy can be turned into a satisfactory one by the use of an endocervical speculum. You can use acetic acid anything between 3 to 5%. I personally use 3% because with 5%, some patients complain of burning. The other point is, as Surekha said, that you should take a biopsy from the lesion which seems to be the worst. And even in the worst lesion, from which part you should take the biopsy, please remember that the lesion seems to be more severe nearer it is to the squamocolumnar junction, which means as it goes outwards, it becomes less severe. So when you're taking a biopsy, take it from the edge of the lesion, which is nearer the squamocolumnar junction. You should always do a Schiller's test, which is putting a Lugol's iodine. Surekha, do you use any antibiotics if you're using a biopsy? I think most of us don't use an antibiotics when you're doing just a colposcopy, but do you use antibiotics if you're using a biopsy?
Yeah, when we are doing a biopsy, we prescribe an oral antibiotic to the patient. However, for colposcopy, we do not.
What do you prefer?
We prescribe, ampicillin or simple cefixime and flagyl.
I actually follow a procedure in the sense that if we are doing any instrumentation in somebody who's desirous of future childbearing, then my choice of antibiotics is either doxycycline, or if I have anticipated then I give a pre-procedure azithromycin the previous night, because it is not feasible to test for chlamydia, and that is my personal choice of putting them on doxycycline, especially if they are planning to have a future childbearing, and especially if we've done an intrauterine instrumentation. Vaishali, over to you for cervical colony. It's such an easy panel to conduct for me.
Thank you, sir. I'll just share my slide. I'm good to go?
Yeah, please do a slideshow, please, Vaishali.
Yes. So we have seen a very nice explanation for how to take the pap smear and again the colposcopy. And after that, if we have a cervical erosion, which actually by definition, it's just the columnar endocervical epithelium, which has gone beyond external cervical os and it has replaced the squamous epithelium. It can be congenital, but we rarely see that. But most of the time it is because of the hormonal influence, maybe because of chronic cervicitis. And this is mainly seen due to the high estrogen levels in pregnancy or when the patient is on contraceptive pills. And when this papillary or hormonal erosion is seen, we can see this endocervical epithelium, which is papillary type, which is covering the external part of the cervix, and we call it as erosion or ectropion or ectopy. And the signs and symptoms of this condition usually are mucopurulent or rarely blood-stained discharge. There can be even spotting postcoital. And during pregnancy, this erosion may be very vascular and it can bleed easily, and thus the patient may present with antepartum hemorrhage or some bleeding during pregnancy. Whenever we have a lesion like this, we need to evaluate it with pap test or liquid-based cytology, which we have seen the excellent presentation of. We can also do the human papillomavirus test along with this, if possible. Then a colposcopy if needed. And if any lesion is found on colposcopy, which Surekha has just very well elaborated, a biopsy may be needed. So with this, if we have ruled out, like with cytology, colposcopy, and then histopathology rules out any microinvasive cancerous lesion, then we can go ahead with an ablative lesion. And this ablation can be with diathermy or with cryotherapy in our OPDs. And let's see how we can go ahead with this. Now in cryotherapy, or what we do is either the liquid nitrogen or carbon dioxide, the refrigerant, at very low temperature, they are released with a gun, the cryo gun at the tip, and it gives a temperature which is less than minus 20 degrees to minus 60 degrees. And then that leads to cell death. The depth of the cryodestruction is around 4 to 5 millimeters. We have different probes available with this cryo gun. Commonly, we use a flat probe, which gives us a good wide area of coverage. This procedure has the advantage of being done in OPD and doesn't need any anesthesia. Even in long-term studies, there is no impact on fertility has been found, and the success rate is quite good of around 93 to 97%. How this acts, basically we work with the freeze-thaw-freeze mechanism. Here, when the cold temperature, the freezing temperature is applied to the cells, the water crystallizes in the intracellular spaces, and that leads to cellular dehydration, and then the cells shrink. The membrane gets damaged, and during thawing, the ice melts, the extracellular environment rapidly becomes hypotonic, and that allows the water to enter the damaged cells, causing further cell membrane disruption. So this freeze-thaw-freeze technique works wonderfully to give us healing of these cervical ectropion. The advantages of cryotherapies: serious injuries are very rare, it is quick, it takes only short time, no anesthesia, as I already said, inexpensive equipment, and a simple procedure. Again, blood loss is not a factor here because there is a sealing effect of the frozen tissue. It is less expensive than the laser, but quite good precision we can obtain, and it can even be used in blood dyscrasias. There are certain disadvantages, like there can be minor cramps in lower abdomen, and we need to explain this to our patient before this procedure, that she would have profuse and watery discharge for a longer time, maybe 4 to 6 weeks post procedure. There can be even light spotting over 2 weeks. In this procedure, cervical stenosis or dystocia is very rarely seen. The squamocolumnar junction may rarely recede into this endocervical canal. So this is the setup where we have cryo probes, the cryo gun, which we can see here, the pressure gauge, and the stopwatch, because we need to monitor the time when we apply the probe. So we are just going to have a quick video here how the cryosurgery works. This is the cervical lesion, which is beautifully seen. The probe is applied to the lesion without being touched to any of the vaginal walls. So the cervix should be properly visualized, and the walls of the vagina should be retracted. Once we apply and the squeeze, we squeeze the trigger, the temperature will fall and the ice ball will start forming around the probe. We need to have this ice ball almost 5 to 7 millimeter outside the probe margin so as to have the complete lesion covered. Once we obtain that, then we stop the trigger, and gradually the temperature would come back to normal, giving thawing effect. Here we are still obtaining that. Yes, now the thawing effect, you can see that the probe has come out on its own. We are not supposed to pull it because that will lead to injury. And again, we need to apply the probe and the freezing for 3 more minutes. So 3 minutes first, then 5 minutes thawing, and 3 minutes reapplication will give us excellent result. We have probes of different size to cover the whole lesion. So freeze thaw freeze is the mechanism which works here. I'll stop this video and go for the next slide. Sorry for that. Yeah, now this is electrocautery, where we are doing the same lesion we are treating with burning by using the electric current or the thermal energy. So in this, we have the cautery needle or the probe, which I can be even the ball shape, and that we use from with the linear radial burns we give starting from inside out, that the cervical margin from inside out. And this is useful mainly when the lesion is irregular, wide enough, which is reaching out of, which is getting extended towards the outer margin of the cervix. This cautery, electric cautery, helps us. We may have to go for paracervical block sometimes. And if the lesion is very extensive and deep burning is required, then it is better to do it in OT, in minor OT, maybe under general anesthesia if extensive is required. But otherwise, we can safely use it in OPD under paracervical block. And as you can see, I'll just forward it, and you can see the margins are getting completely covered. And this is how it looks when the cervix is completely burnt. It's a good idea to dilate the cervix before the procedure as well as at the end of the procedure so as to avoid cervical stenosis, as which is commonly seen with electrocauterization. Thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, please stop sharing.
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to say a couple of things. As Vaishali said, you can either do a electrocautery or a cryocautery. And there are two indications why we do a cautery. Number one, if somebody has a cervical erosion. And it pains me to see that many people still do a hysterectomy because of a diagnosis of cervical erosion. Cervical erosion is something which is normal. It is actually an ectropion, as Dr. Vaishali explained, and it needs to be treated only if it is symptomatic, which means somebody has got postcoital bleeding, which is the most common symptom. And that time an electrocautery would suffice. And as Dr. Vaishali has nicely shown the procedure of electrocautery, you can even do a cryocautery. The second indication while we do a cautery is if somebody has got a CIN1 lesion. And if it's a CIN1 lesion,
yes,
then it is better to do a cryocautery, or in the CAM settings, maybe silver nitrate. And cryocautery, you can do it with two techniques, as Dr. Vaishali said, that 3-5-3, freeze or freeze, or you can even do a single freeze of 5. Do you put any local cream at the end of the procedure, Vaishali?
So we may apply betadine cream.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And do you give them any antibiotics? Post-procedure advice, Dr. Vaishali has already said that please tell them that they can expect profuse watery discharge and not to get alarmed by that. And that is very important, and not to have intercourse till the discharge has subsided.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you give them antibiotics?
So yes, sir. If there is infection, I would like to treat it before doing the procedure. And with the procedure also, sir, it's better, as you said, doxycycline is preferred if the extensive procedure is being done. And we need to tell them about the discharge, as we said. But if she has any cramping pain or bleeding or foul smelling discharge, even beyond a week or so, she should come back to us immediately. And we should also warn her about her cervical screening, which she has to continue later on. As you have rightly said that in CIN 1 and 2, we would like to do this. So even the cervical screening, she should be doing maybe after 3 to 6 months post-procedure.
Yeah, I think that's important, that profuse watery discharge, not to worry, but if she's got crampy pain or a foul-smelling discharge or bleeding, that is when she should come back. There are 2 points which I forgot to mention earlier, because Anahita and Surekha both mentioned about this, that we need to select the right speculum for the patient. Most Casco speculum will come in 3 sizes, small, medium, and large, and depending on your assessment, you need to choose the right speculum. And I think one point Dr. Surekha said, very important, that if you're planning to do a colposcopy or even a pap smear, please do not clean. If you're doing a pap smear, do not clean the cervix. And if you are planning to do a colposcopy, do not clean it with anything other than normal saline. Last but not the least, we move to the National Capital Region. And Anshu, it is up to you to speak about IUCD insertion.
Just sharing my slides. It's visible, sir, my slides?
Yes.
So basically, before my the present this video will be present. So how to technique of the IUCD insertion. So before starting the technique, we you should all know okay, what is the required instrument for that particular procedure. So instrument required in unopened, undamaged, sterile package of the IUD is the must thing first. So we have to first check the package should not be unsterile and it's not be torn. Apart from that, bivalve speculum, pinaculum, preferably the double tooth one, and we should avoid the multi-toothed because it causes pain. Uterine sound, ring forceps, sharp scissor to cut the thread, and the narrow forceps just for the sponge holder to just clean the vagina. Instruments used during the procedure is another instrument important is the light source, which is very, very important to visualize the cervix, and gloves. And in this particular in part, I have to specify that we need to keep 2 pairs of sterile gloves. Why it is important? Because the first pair, while during the loading of the unsterile, tearing the pack of the IUD, and after that, while before insertion, we have to just use another sterile pair of gloves to not to unsterile our IUD. So bowl with the antiseptic solution, sterile gauze, cotton balls, drape cloth to cover table and the woman's pelvic area. Preventing infection during IUCD insertion, for that we all know the wash hands before and after procedure and wear examination gloves, use high level disinfectant, and usually what we are using is the basic betadine solution. First of all, load the intrauterine device within the sterile package without touching the tip or without touching the intrauterine device. Clean the cervix with antiseptic, insert the intrauterine device without touching the speculum blades or vaginal wall, and pass sound and loaded intrauterine device only once through the cervical spine, cervical canal. In this, I would just like to specify it's not necessary to insert a sound in all patients where you are able to see the os is open and it's negotiable. So uterine sound is not necessary for all the patients. For the IUCD insertion procedure, conduct a bimanual examination is the first thing we should know. The screen for the eligibility, determine the position of the uterus, it is anteverted or it's anteflex or not. Sound the uterus to determine the depth, how much is the length of the uterus, which is required to load the IUD. And after that, first, most important is to how to load the IUD, which I will show you in the later part of my video. So insert it without taking it out of the sterile package, place the IUD into the uterus and allow the woman to rest after the procedure. This is the basic overview of the intrauterine device insertion procedure. So first of all, how to perform the pelvic examination, conduct the pelvic examination, bimanual examination, then speculum examination. Screen for the medical eligibility, that is obviously to be done before the starting the procedure. There should not be the sign and symptoms of infection or vaginal pelvic inflammatory infection. We have to rule out the sexually transmitted disease, pelvic inflammatory infection, any kind of malignancy. These should be obviously ruled out. And if suspicion of any kind of infection, do not insert the intrauterine device and diagnose what kind of infection it is and treat as appropriate, then reassess for the insertion. Assess position of the uterus to determine appropriate orientation of a sound if you are using a sound in that particular patient. And sound the uterus if you are using a uterine sound. So clean the cervix with an antiseptic solution, apply a tenaculum to hold the cervix, gently pull the tenaculum to align the uterus, cervical opening and the vaginal canal. Insert the uterine sound into the vagina and through the cervical opening. Advance the sound into the uterine cavity until a slight resistance is felt. And that will be the mark. You have to just take a measurement, what is the depth of a uterus. Slowly withdraw the sound and assess the level of mucus or blood to determine the depth of the uterus. And average depth usually is to be 6 to 8 centimeters. So now the most important step is how to load the intrauterine device. This is a very, very important step, and everybody should know. Without it should be in a no-touch technique of what is the no-touch technique. So load the intrauterine device by folding its arms and placing them inside the insertion tube. Do not load more than 5 minutes before inserting the intrauterine device into the uterus. And if intrauterine device arms remain folded for more than 5 minutes, they may not return to their original shape when it is released. That is to be known by every person who is trying to insert the intrauterine device. So insert the intrauterine device into the vagina, gently grasp the tenaculum still in place from sounding the uterus, and apply gentle traction. Insert the loaded intrauterine device without touching vaginal walls or speculum blades. Advance the intrauterine device into the uterus, gently advance the loaded intrauterine device on the uterine cavity, and stop when the blue depth gauze comes in contact with the cervix or light resistance spell, which is a sign of you're touching the fundus of the uterus. So release of intrauterine device and hold the tenaculum and white plunger rod stationary while partially withdrawing the insertion tube, and then this release the arms of a intrauterine device. So gently push insertion tube, gently push the insertion tube until you feel a slight resistance, and the step ensures the placement of a high in the uterus, and the device is placed adequately where it should be. And remove the white plunger rod while holding the insertion tube to the stationary. Gently and slowly withdraw the inserted tube from the cervical canal and until string can be seen protruding from the cervical canal. Use sharp myo scissors or to just cut the strings 3 to 4 centimeters from the cervical opening. If scissors are dull, intrauterine device strings may get caught in a blades. So completely withdraw insertion tube with cut ends of the strings inside. After that, remove the tenaculum and gently remove the tenaculum and observe the woman's cervix for any kind of bleeding from the tenaculum side. If the bleeding is seen, just hold with a swab to just give a little bit of pressure to just stop the bleeding. And if still the bleeding is there, we have to just hold for another minimum of 1 minute to just stop the bleeding. Now, this is a just animated video which is showing how we have to proceed for the insertion.
To confirm the shape, size, and direction of.
So this is a video where we are trying to show how to insert a speculum first. So these are the instruments basically required before which I already discussed in my slide. Now we have to just go through. So knowing all, because this is an animated slide, so we have to just, this ball is, we are considering as a uterus, and this is the cuff, this is the vagina. So the vaginal, that cervical opening we are painting with a betadine solution, that area. So ideally, as per the guidelines, which is saying that all patients are not required the vaginal cleaning, but in the routine practice which we are following, we have to just clean the vagina to just, because the whatever the patient is having, these infection can be go inside and causes the another associated infection will be happen. So we have to clean a vagina definitely. Now this is the thing how we have to load the intrauterine device. So this is a basically in string which is shown and the rod. So we, without touching the, I think this video is just a minute. So after the first procedure, cleaning and taking all antiseptic precaution, first of all, we have to tear the pack halfway, and we have to just keep on a flat surface and just tear the pack with a halfway. And first, after the measuring the uterus, we have to know what is the depth of the uterus. So we have to adjust that we have to adjust the plunger, and so we can adjust the length of the, according to the length of the uterus, we have to adjust the thing. And after that we have to first insert our plunger inside without touching the tip of a IUD. And after doing that, then after measuring the uterine, after the length of the uterus is once then done, then we have to remove other part of the, without touching the tip, we have to just remove whole thing. And with the no touch technique, we have to just hold the cervix in a, to just align the cervix and insert it and touch the fundus, and we just remove the arbor with the withdrawal method, which is very much clearly seen in this video. So after removing this, we should not in hurry to remove our tenaculum. We have to first cut the thread 2 to 3 centimeter long, and after that we have to remove the, slowly we have to remove the tenaculum. And the most important step in this, whenever you are cutting the thread should be felt by the patient. So in later part, when you will ask the patient to for the self-examination, she should aware about you what is the feel of a thread. That is very important. So apart from that, after insertion, you have to ask a patient to lie down for some times to just take a rest. And we have the give all the instruction related with what are the instruction to be followed, like the what are the expected things to be happen after this procedure. That is in regarding to their bleeding, vaginal bleeding, which is expected, abdominal cramps, which is expected, and in coming few cycles will be erratic in manner of excessive blood flow, or with the cramps, associated cramps, or sometimes she might face amenorrhea, there's no periods at all. So these are the things should be clearly explained to the patient. And if she face, anytime she face with any kind of dizziness, giddiness, these kind of things, immediately after that, after going from a OPD, she should immediately come to the OPD and consult their gynecs.
Thank you, Anshu. I think you've described the instruments very well. If the patient we think has a low pain threshold, sometimes it is useful to give an antispasmodic before the procedure. Antibiotics we've already discussed, and there are 3 important points. One is do not load it into the inserter too soon, because it will lose its memory. Number 2, when you insert it, just stay around 1 centimeter below the fundus, open the IUCD and then push it up to the fundus. And with Mirena, because Mirena is a bit thicker than the normal IUCD, does anybody use misoprostol?
Can I, sir? Basically, there is no evidence which is suggestive of the misoprostol has a great role with the insertion, because especially with the any kind of the cervical priming, which is not helpful for the misoprostol. On top of that, it says the adverse effect, which is more, and which with that the patient used to come back in a OPD. So as per the guidelines, it is not suggested any kind of cervical priming.
Okay.
But definitely where you are feel like your
anybody else in the panel uses misoprostol before using outpatient Mirena? Anahita, Charmila?
I use sometimes.
I use because of the simple reason there is a wonderful randomized control trial published from Gujarat about 15 years back, which showed that in hysteroscopy using a misoprostol helps. And if that helps, I find no reason to believe why it shouldn't help in an IUCD. We are actually running out of time, and I moved to the last one, and from NCR we moved to Trichy, and I have saved the best for last. And the reason I attach undue extra importance to this is because this is a procedure which is so easy to do but is so underutilized. I see so many women undergoing an unnecessary DNC or a hysteroscopy DNC when all it would suffice is an outpatient endometrial biopsy. Over to you, Charmila, to speak about outpatient endometrial biopsy.
Thank you so much, sir. I think everybody is exhausted with the number of procedures being done in the OPD today, but let me make it very short and hopefully useful. So for endometrial biopsy, the instrument I use is a Pipples device, and this is the device which is used. And I've got a catheter with me, which I use routinely. And these are the instruments I use when I'm trying to put a Pipples device to take an endometrial biopsy. This is the way the procedure is done. That is, you put it inside the uterus like all the other procedures which I described. The copper T insertion, the IUCD insertion, and for a cervical biopsy, like it is similar to that. You put a speculum inside, you put the Pipples catheter inside, go into the internal os, go up to the fundus, come a little bit down, and then you withdraw the piston, and then you can twirl it inside the uterine cavity. And as you twirl it, you take the biopsy because it will be suctioning it out into the canal there. So you put it inside, go beyond the internal os, go up to the fundus, then come down a little bit, and then pull the suction, and then you twirl it inside the uterus. And as you suction it out, you'll get a specimen, and you'll be seeing it in the canal. Suppose you're not able to get any tissue, you can again twirl it. It's not necessary that you need to restrict yourself. 4 to 5 twirls you can do, and you can take out a specimen. And you have to take it out very clearly, very carefully, because sometimes you may lose it, the suction is gone off. So be very careful when you're removing it, and put it into the saline or formalin, whichever you want to. The other devices which have been tried are the Bara aspirator, the Tao brush, the Novak Explorer, the tissue trap, the Endoret, infant feeding tube even, and cytospat. But all that is not necessary. The simple Pipples device, which is very cost effective actually, when you use it for a private this thing, it's not very expensive for a patient, and it's very cost effective. And as Sir said, it is underutilized procedure in India, but definitely endometrial biopsy should be done more compared to the curettages which are being done. And the indications are any abnormal uterine bleeding above the age of 45, and that is the American College, any postmenopausal bleeding, younger women with a risk factor for endometrial cancer, example obesity, anovulation, or persistent AUB, or if you wanted to do hormonal studies in infertility and the endometrial receptivity array test, this is one of the best methods to take out a biopsy and send it for the endometrial receptivity. It's very easy to do. Post-procedure advice, please tell her that there may be slight bleeding or cramping. And the advantages of this procedure is it's very easy, it's very simple, it's got a high sensitivity in detecting endometrial cancer. Many have got a feeling that the Pipples does not actually do equal to a curettage or a hysteroscopy, but actually it has got a very high sensitivity in detecting endometrial cancer. The negative predictive value is almost 100% for endometrial carcinoma and hyperplasia. Regarding endometritis, it can tell you by 99.2%, but it's 89.6% for endometrial polyps, and that's understandable. And regarding the pain relief which you give, there are several methods which have been advised. Either you can give an oral ibuprofen tablet 30 to 60 minutes before the procedure, or a rectal diclofenac sodium suppository half an hour to 1 hour before the procedure, or an intrauterine anesthetic that can be given like 5 ml or 2% lidocaine slowly into the uterine cavity through a feeding catheter, blue feeding catheter. Or you can spray the cervix with an anesthetic spray, just 10% lidocaine, which needs to be left for 3 minutes before you start your endometrial biopsy. Or if she's a very anxious patient, you're unable to do the procedure, you can actually give a paracervical block, and that needs to be there for 3 minutes before you start your procedure. Or even intravenous tinoxicam is the latest drug which has been advised for a pre-procedural relief of pain, and that is 4 ml you give IV, wait for half an hour, and then you do the endometrial biopsy. But the best method for pain relief in endometrial biopsy is intrauterine lidocaine. It is much superior to the other techniques of paracervical block or intravenous tinoxicam. But cervical spray also surprisingly had good efficacy in many studies. The difficulties you will have in an endometrial biopsy is when you have an extremely anxious patient who has read too much in Google, and she'll come asking about like how much will the pain be and what all the complications she'll have. That sort of patients you need to really counsel before you take her. A postmenopausal women with the fornix, with the vaginal fornix being like flushed with the cervix, may be a little difficult to take with a Pipples curette. or suppose she has not had a previous vaginal delivery, there may be an acutely anteverted or retroverted uterus where the cervical angulation may prevent you by taking a OP procedure of endometrial biopsy, and pelvic organ prolapse may give you some difficulties. And the real difficulty we'll have in the cervix is very mobile, and this is a flexible device, and sometimes you'll have difficulty in accessing through the internal os, and that time you may need to use a tenaculum, and that's why pain relief is very, very important in such a procedure. And the uterocervical angulation, if it's there, you may need to use a tenaculum to straighten out the cervix before you put the device inside. The challenges will be the cost of the various sampling devices. The main point is the comfort of the gynecologist. Many are not used to taking endometrial biopsies in an OP setting, and they've got many perceived problems with this procedure, and that is mainly about the doubt about the adequacy of the representative sample. But actually, that's not true. It has got a very good sensitivity as well as a specificity. They're comparable to endometrial curettage or a hysteroscopy. So it can be done as an OP procedure. But always remember, if you're going to do an ultrasound to find out endometrial thickness, please do it before the procedure, because if you use a Pipples, it will actually make the endometrium thinner by 0.4 mm, and there can be echogenic spots, which you can misinterpret as sonographic lesions. So it's always better if you do an ultrasound before you do an endometrial biopsy. And the indications for hysteroscopy and a targeted biopsy, but you cannot do a Pipples endometrial biopsies, a focal lesion if you see in an ultrasound, and that too, especially in a postmenopausal group, you may miss out the polyps, which may be adenomatous or carcinomatous. So it's better if you do for a focal lesion in a postmenopausal group, a hysteroscopy and a targeted biopsy. And suppose the endometrial thickness cannot be assessed with an ultrasound, which can happen in extremely obese patients. It's better if you go for a curettage because you can miss out lesions, or an inadequate sampling in an endometrial biopsy, but that usually is an atrophic endometrium. Rarely it can be still an endometrial carcinoma. So if you're inadequately sampling, then we need to go for a hysteroscopy and a targeted biopsy. And sometimes it may be an unsuccessful endometrial biopsy where it can happen because of a stenocervix, a cervix flushed with a vault, or acutely anteverted or a retroverted uterus, or a person who's morbidly obese. And sometimes in uterine anomalies, you may have difficulty in accessing the endometrial cavity. Thank you so much, sir, for the opportunity.
Thank you. I think Charmila has answered most of my questions. Charmila, any role of misoprostol?
So I've used it actually, but it's very painful for a certain group of patients. They always say that there's a cramping which is there before the procedure. Many do not accept, and they actually prefer a curettage under anesthesia. But I've given misoprostol for a group of patients, and easier to access when you give misoprostol.
Okay. I actually find most of the cases we do not need a misoprostol. Especially for doing an endometrial biopsy. I think I will add, Charmila has nicely said, when do you do a hysteroscopy and when do you decide on an outpatient biopsy? If you see a global thickening of the endometrium and you are not suspecting a focal lesion, these patients are very suitable for outpatient biopsy. Whereas if you suspect a focal lesion, that is when you do a hysteroscopy, or if there is a failed outpatient biopsy. The only other indication I would add is a recurrent postmenopausal bleeding, where the previous endometrial biopsy has been, outpatient biopsy has been normal. That's the only thing I would add. The other important thing to remember is whether you're doing a hysteroscopy, whether you're doing a endometrial biopsy, if there is an intrauterine pathology like a polyp or a fibroid, usually it doesn't require dilatation. Usually the os will allow some degree of instrumentation. I think that is it. Only the last question, the 12th question to Surekha: how long do you need to preserve your OPD records, and in what form?
Okay. So thank you very much for that question. So as far as any recommendations are concerned, the formal recommendations are not there regarding how long to preserve. But if you go on the MCI website, you will find that the recommendations are to preserve the OPD as well as IPD records for 3 to 5 years. So 3 to 5 years are what we preserve. We have a record section, and that is where the records are preserved. Now, as far as what I have talked with legal experts and what they recommend, that as the delivery cases are concerned, many a times it happens that in certain cases, when the child comes of age, that is at 18 years of age, After that also the child can sue you for certain maybe the care has not been taken properly for his or her mother, so they may sue. So maybe 21 years may be required, but I don't consider it a very feasible. So 3 to 5 years is what is recommended. If
India is catching up
can
with
I complete it,
Yeah, go ahead.
Bhaskar? Yeah, for ART procedures, what is recommended is 10 years. After 10 years of age, you have to shift the records to the National Registry. For MTP procedures, 5 years. For PCP NDT, according to the law, 2 years. And if any criminal case or civil case is going against the doctor, then you have to preserve the records till the case has been decided accordingly. So basically 3 to 5 years.
The reason the 3 years is that a patient has a window of 3 years to file a case against you. And that is why it is 3 years. And while the OPD prescriptions might predate the incident by a few months or years, and that is why it is 3 to 5 years. And obstetrics, it is 21 years because up to the age, from the age of 18, they have got 3 years to file a case against you. Charmila, you had your hands up.
No, the same thing only. The gynec papers for 5 years it's enough. Only the obstetric papers and your infertility cases, you need to keep it for a longer period of time, like 20 years or something. But not for gynec papers. You cannot keep a speculum examination, PV examination for 21 years with you. That
brings me to the end of the panel. So if anybody has anything to add, otherwise I'll hand it over back to Ritu and Jaydeep. Anahita, Anshu, Vaishali, Munjal.
I think we covered it exhaustively, and it was a great experience doing it in this format.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. We enjoyed it.
Thanks, Jaydeep.
Thank you, Jaydeep sir. Thank you, Bhaskar sir, for this wonderful panel and the whole session. Thank you so much.
All thanks to Jaydeep.
So thank you very much, Bhaskar.
I'm worried that even if when Jaydeep is just finished his Secretary General, he gives us 48 hours notice to do things, what he'll do when he becomes President of Foxy.
6 hours.
When I become president, I'll give you 1 year's notice, Bhaskar. So thank you very much to all the panelists. That was indeed a very different and a very informative panel. Thank you, Bhaskar, for putting it together, and thank you all the panelists, Anahita, Charmila, Surekha, Munjal, Vaishali, and Anshu, for coming up with that very, very informative panel discussion. I'm happy to inform you that we've had more than 3,000 views in this webinar. There is something views and something, but 3,000 views is what I have been told. So thank you very much, everybody. And we are looking forward to the next 12th, when we will have one more inspiring conversation and one panel and one talk to share again. So remember, on the 12th of every month, for 12 months, 12 webinars and 12 photos, as Bhaskar pointed out. Thank you very much again. Ritu, if you would like to conclude.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the opportunity to moderate the first very episode of Bara on Bara. It was such a pleasure and honor, and I got to hear such great people speaking, and the panel was so different and so amazing. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for being a part of our webinar. Thank you to our academic partners, and thank you also for our media channel partners on Prince. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ritu.
Bye-bye. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ritu. Thank you, Jaydeep.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.